Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Haunted Sleep. This is the place where eerie tales and calming whispers meet, helping you drift into peaceful sleep with a touch of mystery. Before we begin tonight's story, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Leave a comment below and let me know. And if you're enjoying these nightly journeys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a night of chilling calm. Now, close your eyes, get comfortable, and let's drift into the unknown together. No father should stand where I stood, by a dark rectangle of earth, the morning air thin and cold, the sun trying but failing to warm the backs of people in black coats, watching a coffin go down and down until it touched the quiet. There are many things in this world that don't feel right, but that moment felt wrong in a way that made every breath taste like metal. I don't know if there's such a thing as a right age to die. I know there are long lives, and there are short lives, and there are lives that feel complete no matter how many years they had in them. But I also know what isn't right. 17 isn't right. 17 is a desk still full of notebooks with drawings in the margins, a pile of laundry that still smells like a cheap strawberry shampoo, a pair of shoes kicked off near the door because the laces were too tight and dinner was ready and... Just a sec, Dad. 17 is not silence under dirt. People say prayers at times like that. They say them for comfort, and they say them because they don't know what else to do with their hands and their mouths. I said them because my mother taught me to, and because the shape of the words was something to hold on to. But I kept thinking that a world where prayers are answered the way you want them to be is a world where you never need them in the first place. That world isn't ours. Ours is a world where you learn to talk anyway, even when you know no one is going to talk back. I keep replaying the hours I spent on the floor with you when you were small. The way you'd crawl toward the tower of blocks I just built because knocking things down is always better than building them up. The faces I pulled to try to get you to laugh when you were still too young to understand my bad jokes. The lullabies I sang off-key, and the songs that weren't lullabies at all, the ones with too much drum and too many words. But you loved them anyway because they were loud and you were alive. I read books out loud, doing the voices because you made me do the voices. And I made up stories in between the pages because you'd ask. And then what? Those memories used to be the best part of me. Now they pinch like a shoe that's too tight, like I grew into a person who can't fit the past anymore. I thought all that time meant something solid, like a savings account you can draw from when things get tough. I kept thinking that if I was a good father in all the little ways, if I showed up to the school plays and took you to practice and learned how to braid hair from a video and never forgot to put the bandage in my pocket because you always scraped your knee, then somehow it would add up to a kind of protection. That the love I invested would be enough to pull you out of any deep water you might step into. I was wrong. I wasn't there when it mattered most. Nothing I did before and nothing I do now changes that simple, awful fact. They found the knife in the woods. The police told me that. Papers and plastic sleeves, voices low and even. They said it was a slow death, but they also said people pass out when the body has had too much, that sometimes pain folds in on itself, and the mind drifts. I held on to that for a while, because a parent will hold any thread that promises even a little kindness. Then I stopped. Holding on to pictures I couldn't control was like trying to breathe underwater. Still, questions keep coming. They line up and they wait their turn. Did you regret it the second the blade met skin? Did you mean to do so much harm? Did panic come, quick and terrible, when blood wouldn't stop being blood, wouldn't stop being itself and stay where it belonged? Did you press your hands down, clumsy and shaking, because you thought pressure fixes everything? Did you call for help and change your mind before the first ring finished? Did shame sit with you on the cold ground like a person? Or did you not plan anything at all? Maybe time started running like an animal the moment before, and your heart pounded so hard it seemed like someone else's heart living in your chest, and the world narrowed to a thin, bright thread, and when you reached out to grab something, anything, your hands found the worst possible thing. People are quick with reasons. That's their way of protecting themselves. They say words like troubled and risk and signs we missed. They say impulse, Like everything important can be filed in a drawer with a neat label, and if you put the drawer back, the cabinet will stand properly again. I've tried to listen. I've tried to nod when a kind face leans toward me and shapes the words. It's not your fault. Because I know the speaker is trying to hand me something lighter to carry. I've tried to hand it back every time. Because fault isn't a coat you can shrug off and give to someone else. It's heavier than that. It's a thing you sit with. It sits with you. Were you thinking of anyone left behind? Did I cross your mind? Your mother? The people who loved you in easy ways and the people you didn't know you mattered to yet? We make lists when we don't know what else to do. Here's mine. I think of your best friend in our kitchen, standing with a paper cup because her hands needed something to hold, telling us about the way you used to draw sunflowers on her wrists when she was nervous. I think of the coach who called to say there was never a kid who showed up early just to sweep the floor because it made practice feel better. I think of your math teacher, the one you swore hated you, sending a card with a sentence underlined twice. She tried. It takes a while to understand that everyone around you is carrying something, and sometimes they don't know how to set it down. The pain you had doesn't stop being pain just because you pass it along. That's the worst part. It doesn't go away. It finds a new home and sits down and takes off its shoes like it intends to stay. It moves from one person to the next, and from one room to another, and it doesn't respect doors or rules. You put your pain down where we live, and now it walks through our house even when the windows are open and the sun is out. I know what you think I should say here. You think I should use a different word. You think I should call you a monster. You think I should shake my fist at the sky and shout, and maybe blame the world and God and myself and anyone who ever looked at you the wrong way. I don't have the strength for the fist part anymore, and I don't think you were a monster. I don't think anyone is born meaning to hurt the people who warm their food and pay their bills and sit in car lines and apologize to teachers on their behalf and kiss their foreheads at night even when those foreheads are sweaty from sleep. I think there are cracks in things, and we don't always see them until they make a noise. I think there are rooms in the mind that look locked but aren't, and some of us wander in when the light is wrong, and we can't remember the way out because every door looks the same. I think the world taught you some hard lessons long before I got a chance to soften them with better ones. So no, I don't hate you. People expect me to. People would say it would be normal if I did. Maybe they would even call it healthy. I don't know about healthy anymore. I just know what is true for me. I hate the way the life we live makes it possible for a good kid to end up alone with a terrible choice. I hate that there are days when the adults are too tired or too distracted or too sad themselves to see what needs seeing. I hate how fast the dark can feel when a room is full of quiet. I hate everything that pressed in on you and made you into someone who could put a knife into a future and make it stop. I forgive you. People will doubt that sentence. They'll say it's words and only words, and maybe they'll be right. But words are the only thing I have. Forgiveness isn't a blessing I sprinkle on a head like water. It isn't a door I open one day and then it stays open without effort. Forgiveness is a thing I have to practice, like breathing when I'd rather hold my breath. It is not easy. Sometimes I can say the word and feel something loosen in my chest. Sometimes I say it and feel nothing. Sometimes I say it and feel anger scratch from the inside to be let out. But I keep saying it because it's the only thing that lets me talk to you at all. If I fix you in my mind as only the worst thing you did, then I lose you completely. If I remember you as a person who had good days and bad ones, who loved Sunday morning pancakes and hated wearing socks, who always took forever in the shower and used up all the hot water because you said cold water made you think of the ocean and then you'd start to sing and lose track of time. If I remember all that, then you are still my child, and I can still speak to you, and I can still hope that somewhere you can hear me. You were 17. I keep repeating that to myself. 17. I remember you at 7, missing your 2 front teeth and still convinced you could fly if you jumped from the second step and flapped hard enough. I remember you at 12, rolling your eyes at me and then later crawling onto the couch to put your feet under my leg because your toes were cold. 17 is closer to 7 than it is to 40. 17 still runs down the hall. 17 still laughs when someone slips on ice as long as they don't get hurt, and then laughs harder when they get back up and laugh too. 17 says, "I'm fine," and sometimes means it and sometimes doesn't. 17 spends too long in the mirror and then forgets that hair matters at all because there's a dog to pet and a friend to text. 17 is not a number that knows how final is. I keep thinking of the woods. The way branches make a ceiling even at noon. The way the ground holds on to cold long after your skin has warmed up in the sun. I think of your shoes, thin-soled things with white rubber that scuffed easily, the kind we told you weren't meant for trails and you wore anyway because they looked good. I think of your hands, small and capable. I think of how quiet it must have been. I think of the birds who didn't know anything except that a shape was sitting there that wasn't usually there, and I wonder if they sang anyway. I hope they did. I hope the wind lifted some leaves and made a sound you liked. I hope you saw a stripe of light come through and land on the ground and make the dirt look gold. I hope you weren't cold. I hope the world was kind to you in all the little ways even if you couldn't feel it. They told me about the knife. They told me where they found it. They put facts on a table and pushed them toward me like plates of food I couldn't eat. I nodded because nodding is something you can do when you can't think. Later, when I could think again, I sat at the kitchen table and held a spoon and tried to remember what it felt like to be hungry. I couldn't. The first day, the house filled with people. Food arrived in foil pans with little notes taped on top. Flowers came and made the room smell like a funeral home before the funeral home. Your room stayed the same. The music from your phone still drifted from under the door when I let it play, that same 3-song loop you always forgot to turn off. The second day, there were fewer people. The third day, fewer still. People are kind, and they have lives. I don't blame them. But the way a house empties after a loss makes you notice the shape of air. I took the call from the counselor at your school. She told me in a careful voice what resources they could offer the other students, the ones who would miss you when they walked past your locker. I thanked her. Then I hung up and stared at the blotter on the desk where you used to do homework. My eyes kept catching on the little scars you put in the wood with your pencil when you pressed too hard. I traced them with my finger. The counselor's words dissolved into a simple idea. Your friends had something I didn't have. They had a hallway they could avoid if it hurt. I had a house full of you. If I knew how to fix pain, to scoop it up and throw it into the sky like a handful of sand and watch the wind take it away, I would teach everyone I love how to do it. But I don't. I know this, pain changes shape. It doesn't go when you tell it to. It doesn't obey clocks. Some mornings I wake and for one breath I don't remember, and then everything rushes back, and I sit up too fast and my chest hurts because I tried to stand up inside a memory. Some nights I watch the newscaster move her mouth on a screen and I understand none of the words, because every word is just a sound. Grief makes a room feel too bright and too dim at the same time. And still the laundry needs doing. Still the trash goes out. Still the dog waits by the door at the same time every evening. The world keeps the same shape, and I walk around inside it, a person-shaped thing that sometimes remembers how to smile. People tell me to be angry. They say it like it's a medicine. Be angry. As if anger burns clean and leaves you fresh. Sometimes it probably does. Sometimes it's useful, like a fire in a fireplace. It gives light and heat and keeps wild things away. But I keep thinking of you as a small kid at the kitchen table, your legs swinging because they couldn't reach the floor. I keep thinking of the way you'd sneak a pepperoni off the pizza and put it back and then say you didn't because your fingers smelled like pepperoni, and you didn't think that far ahead. I keep thinking of the first time you said you hated me, and how your face crumpled a second later like the word felt too heavy in your mouth, and I took you in my arms and said, "That's okay, you can hate me for 2 minutes." And then I pulled my phone out and set a timer, and we both looked at the numbers count down, and at the end you leaned your head on my shoulder and said, "I don't anymore." And I said, "Okay." Like it was the most ordinary thing, and maybe it was. So I don't hate you. I hate the pieces of this world that failed you. I hate the way we don't know how to talk about the thoughts that scare us without making other people flinch. I hate how help sometimes looks like a doorway that's too far down a hall you've never walked before. I hate how easy it is to say, I'm fine, and how hard it is to say, I'm not. I hate that pain can feel like the only true thing in the room when it starts talking in your ear. And I hate that on that day, in that hour, in that minute, you were alone with it. I keep thinking about what it means to find you. I don't mean a place. I don't mean a search party moving through trees with bright vests and radios. I don't mean an answer from a person in a suit behind a desk with a file that says, cause, and manner, like those words can hold anything. When I say I will find you, I mean I will build a path with words and walk it every day. I will talk to you when I heat up coffee I don't want. I will talk to you when I pass the bus stop where we used to wait on the first day of school every year, and you'd hide behind me because you didn't want anyone to see your new haircut. I will talk to you when I drop a plate and it breaks into 3 pieces, not 2, because you always said things break into halves and you were wrong and we laughed about it, and I will say out loud, 3, not 2, and I will hear your laugh and follow it. I will find you in the way your mother pulls her sleeves down over her hands when she is cold, because you did that too. I will find you in the smell of cut grass in June, because that was your month. I will find you in the sunflower heads hanging heavy by the fence in September because they kept turning to light, no matter how many times the wind blew them around. I will find you in the quiet between 2 songs on the radio when the DJ talks too long and I can hear my tires on the road. No one promises us that the people we love will be easy to carry. No one tells you how to make sense of the way love keeps going even when the person it belongs to has stopped. It takes practice, the carrying. It takes new muscles. Some days I can't lift it at all and I leave it on the couch like a coat and sit beside it and wait. Other days I can put it on and wear it to the store and back and it keeps me warm. Most days are something in between. And every day there's a moment, sometimes only a breath long, when I forget the rules and I talk to you like you're in the next room. Those moments are the only ones that feel true. So I will keep making them on purpose. That is what I can do. That is what finding you means to me. They asked if I wanted to keep the knife. I stared at the officer because I couldn't understand the question. For evidence, they said, then caught themselves, then said, sorry. I mean, for property. I shook my head. I don't want anything that has only the worst minute of your life in it. I keep the blanket you left on the back of the couch instead. I keep the mug you chipped on the sink and said you didn't. I keep the paper crowns from the crackers we pulled one Christmas because you wore yours for 2 hours and forgot until you caught a glimpse of yourself in the oven door and laughed so hard you cried. I keep the playlist you made called No Skips, even though it has 2 songs I always skipped because I'm old and I get to. I keep the notes you stuck to my monitor that say things like, don't forget milk, and Dad, you promised, and we need more batteries. I keep everything that says you were here and you were a person and you weren't only your ending. If you are able to read this in any way that makes sense, if there is a way for us to send words across whatever distance there is between where I sit and where you are, know this, I am still your father. That didn't stop. Grief changed the furniture in the house, but it didn't change the house. I still get to tell you stories. I still get to be proud of you for the things you did right and the things you tried to do. I still get to forgive the things you did wrong. I still get to wish you good night. I still get to look for you in every bit of light that gets through leaves. I still get to say your name. I still don't know why you did it, Samantha. People will give me reasons. They'll be kind and clinical and full of words like depression and episodes and risk. Maybe some of those words will be right. Maybe none of them will. Maybe the truth is simpler and colder, that you were hurting, and you were alone, and you reached for the nearest way to make the hurting stop, and then you were gone. I hate that truth with every part of me, but I can't turn away from it. If there was a map, I'd follow it. If there was a way to walk backward through every minute until I found the one where I could put my hand on your shoulder and say, stay, I'd wear my feet down to the bone. There isn't. So I will walk forward. I will carry you with me because carrying you is what I know how to do. If you can read this, If there is any part of the world or whatever comes after that lets words land where you are, know this too. I don't forgive the world for putting you in a place where this could happen. I don't forgive the cracks, or the silence, or the way help sometimes hides. I don't forgive the weight that pushed on your chest until you couldn't breathe. I don't forgive the way pain pretends to be the only voice worth listening to. I don't forgive the cold. I don't forgive any of that. But you I forgive. I love. I remember. I wait for. That is the difference between the world and a father. I will find you, Samantha. Somehow, someday, in ways that I do not understand yet, we'll be together again. Until then, I will keep speaking. I will keep listening for you in the spaces between sounds. I will keep a place at the table, and I will put a sunflower there in a jar of water and watch it turn, a little each hour, toward whatever light it can find. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The afternoon sky was gray. A dirt road ran toward a leaning old inn. A tired teenage boy pushed through the wobbling doors and found a huge innkeeper at the desk. The man smiled too wide, fangs bright in the candlelight. Staying the night? The innkeeper asked. Do I have a choice? The boy said. What's the price? The vampire slid out a filthy goblet. Fill it, and you can sleep. The boy sighed. He cut his palm with a small hidden blade. Blood tapped into the cup. The innkeeper watched like a starving animal until he finally said, That's enough. He drank. I need more, he whispered, eyes hot. A key hit the counter. The boy grabbed it and ran. He unlocked the room, slammed the door, and leaned against it, breathing hard. Outside voices rose, screams, laughs, cries, a whole nightmare choir. He dove onto the bed and whispered to himself until sleep took him. It's just a dream. I'm in my room. Safe and sound. He woke at 2 a.m. in his real bedroom. His name was Jack. His computer hummed. His hand throbbed where the dream cut had been, though the skin was clean. A shadow moved in the corner. Jack jumped and dropped his energy drink. The can hissed across the floor. By the time he looked back, the shadow was gone, or had never been there at all. His room was a mess, greasy hair, stubble, empty cans, clothes everywhere. He wiped the spill, tossed trash, and collapsed onto the bed. Sleep dragged him under again. Jack! You're going to be late, his mom called. He staggered up, stuffed on shoes, grabbed his lunch, and sprinted. The bus driver barely stopped. Jack slumped in the back with his friend Matt. You look wrecked, Matt said, grinning. Nightmares again? They're getting worse, Jack muttered. School has counselors, Matt said, joking. Also showers. Jack just stared out the window. That night, Jack blasted metal in his room until his older brother Mark cracked the door. Turn it down. I've got AP exams, Mark said. He studied Jack's face. You okay? You look like death. Thanks, Jack said. It's October. You on something? No. Then sleep. Clean up. If I hear the music again, I'm telling Mom. Mark left, satisfied with his little power play. Jack punched the wall. He hated October. Every night in October, the same kind of dream, running, hiding, bleeding. He shut down the computer, straightened the room, and lay there dreading the drop. Lightning flashed. Rain soaked him. Back in the other place. He moved fast, quiet. The dark here was not empty, it watched. A shout rose ahead. Help! Help! A man stood knee-deep in blue ooze, like gel lit from inside. Pull me out! The man yelled. Jack stared, shook his head, voice small. I'm sorry. You're stuck. What does that mean? The man demanded. The ooze climbed his other leg. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. It can't see or hear, Jack said, shaking. But if it touches anything alive, it eats it. The man tried to laugh it off. Okay, good joke. Now help. The glowing slime crept to his chest, then his shoulders. He screamed. Jack watched, frozen, as it slid over the man's face. For a heartbeat the man looked like a statue, blue and perfect. Then the gel squeezed tight and collapsed, splashing across the dirt. A wider puddle remained. The man was gone. A hand clamped on Jack's shoulder from behind. Another hand covered his mouth. "Ship," an old voice said. Jack turned to see a thin, long-haired man with a kind, tired face. "What happened to him?" Jack whispered. "The trap condensed his astral body into pure energy," the old man said softly. "He's dead. He won't wake up." "Astral?" Jack frowned. "Most people come here by leaving their bodies. Some mean to, some don't," the man said. "I take it you don't?" "It's October," Jack muttered. "It's always October." The old man put an arm around him and guided him on. "There's a portal ahead. It's a pool. Step in and you'll go home. Are you coming?" "I have more to do," he said. "What's your name?" He smiled. "Call me whatever you like." Jack stepped into the bright water. Light swallowed him. He woke in the dark of his room. 4 a.m. He searched, astral projection, on his computer and laughed at the nonsense even while his hands shook. His mom poked in later, scolding about sleep and choices. Jack agreed to try. When she left and the light clicked off, he whispered, "Leave it on," but she was already down the hall. He blinked, and shadows ringed his bed, tall and still, like cutouts. He squeezed his eyes shut, opened them. Still there. He called for his mom. She flipped the light on. The shadows thinned, pale as fog, but did not vanish. He thought he heard a voice inside the hum of the room. "Get some sleep," his mom said, fingers snapping. When the light went out again, the dark leaned close. Jack pulled the blanket over his head and shook until dawn. Next night, more dreams. A field. A glowing river in the distance. A forest in the way, trees darker than the sky. Shadow animals flickered at the edge of his vision. He moved from trunk to trunk until he tripped over something thick and cold. A huge shadow snake lifted its head. Jack ran blind, slammed into a tree, fell hard, stars bursting. The snake slid closer. Then light. A torch. The snake pulled back, faded, fled. "Looks like you needed help," said the old man. Jack's name for him was Sage now. "I saw the portal," Jack said, embarrassed. "Got lost." Sage led him with the torch. "What's your world like?" "Better than this," Jack said. "Our worst monsters are people." "Sounds nice," Sage said. "I can't go back. When I step into the portal, nothing happens. I think I died." "You're a ghost?" Jack whispered. "No more than you are here," Sage said gently. "Just a traveler with no home to return to." "Why help me?" "I remember being your age," Sage said. "Lost and scared. No one believes. I only come here in October," Jack said. "After Halloween, it stops." "What's Halloween?" "We wear costumes, eat candy, go to parties. We pretend the night is fun," Sage chuckled. "People lower their guard." "Interesting. Stupid, but interesting." They reached the glow through the trees. "Cherish what you have," Sage said. "It's not worth losing." Jack stepped from the trees, turned to wave, and saw a shadow behind Sage. "Run!" he shouted. Sage didn't move. Jack stumbled into the pool. He woke, and the shadows stood around his bed again, sharper in the new dark. His mom flipped the light. They thinned but lingered, like stains that light couldn't clean. "It's nothing," he told her, but his breath was shallow. When she left, the room dimmed. The shadows leaned close again. He kept breathing until morning. Halloween came. His mom made popcorn and put on a movie. Jack handed out candy, counting the minutes. When the credits rolled, he said he needed air and walked to the playground. Matt and a few friends were there, passing a joint and warm beer. "Come on, blow off steam," Matt said. "Maybe later," Jack said. He reached for a beer, then froze. The shadows were here, lined up along the fence, flat and patient. No one else seemed to see them. "Dude?" one of the girls asked. "You okay?" The nearest shadow unrolled itself, a low wave spilling across the wood chips toward a boy on the swing. Tendrils rose like smoke, wrapped him gently, then fully, and when they fell away he was gone. The swing swayed. The chain creaked. "When did Joe leave?" someone asked behind Jack. More shadows moved. Jack ran. Street lights made small islands. He aimed for each one. Shadows drifted over roofs and lawns, not hurrying, like they already knew where everyone would be. He slammed into his house, turned on every light. For a moment it worked. The shadows wavered at the windows, some thin and pale over the kitchen tiles. He slid down the wall and hugged his knees. "They're not real," he whispered. "It's in my head." The lights flickered once. Twice. Went out. In the warm, complete dark, something brushed his hair, soft as a hand. And somewhere, far away, water glowed. Bigalow County had not celebrated Halloween for 7 straight years. No costumes on neighborhood streets. No kids with plastic pumpkins. No carved faces glowing on porch steps. No candy aisles rolled out in the small Kmart and the Target on the edge of town. The churches had spoken against the holiday, the older voters had nodded along, parents had worried out loud, and the 5 members of the town council had signed the change into law. It had started as a heated talk in a crowded community hall, and ended as a rule people barely questioned anymore. October came. October went. Front yard stayed dark. Frank Albrecht sat on that council. He was not born in Bigalow County. He came from the city and brought businesses with him when he moved, a towing company, a tire shop, and a home appliance store. He was practical. He liked tidy books and predictable weeks. He did not care much about old debates over pagan customs or modern debates over what was godly. He would not have called himself religious if anyone asked. Still, he had voted with the others when the ban came up all those years ago. The people who shopped in his stores were for it. The people who hired his tow trucks were for it. He had not felt a reason to fight them. Changing Halloween into just another day kept things quiet. Quiet made life easier. The last day of October this year looked like any other for Frank. The sky was clear. The air had that dry, clean feel that comes after a small cold front. He went from his store to his tire shop, checked some numbers, told a young mechanic to slow down and do the job right, then drove home as the sun began to fall behind the line of cottonwoods that marked the creek. His brick house sat at the end of a wide cul-de-sac. Lawns there were big and trimmed. He liked seeing the neat curve of the road and the way the porch lights came on in the evening like pearls set into a dark band. By 8 o'clock, Frank had settled into his study with a mug of black coffee. A green desk lamp lit the papers in front of him. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional tick of the cooling ducts. He tried calling his son, Felix, who managed the family's new truck stop in Coldwater. The call rang and rang. No answer. He tried again and again because that is what you do when your mind is on a loop. The coffee was strong and bitter. The numbers on the spreadsheet were not what he had hoped, but nothing was wrong enough to spoil the night. The doorbell rang. It did not ring once. It jabbed at the house over and over, a fast run of notes, like a child mashing the button with the heel of a hand. Frank blinked up from his papers and felt a small pulse of annoyance travel across his forehead. He put the coffee down and stood. His knees were stiff from sitting. He moved down the hall with the steady, even steps of an older man who was not in a hurry for anyone. He looked through the peephole. A small figure stood on the front step. Not a toddler, but not yet a teenager. The figure wore a black costume of thin fabric and a cheap plastic mask the color of a pumpkin. The wide triangle eyes of the mask were empty and dark, as any mask would be in the shadows of a porch at night. A pillowcase hung from one hand. Out past the little stoop, the cul-de-sac lay still, a pale loop of pavement under calm streetlights. He did not see any adult shapes nearby. He opened the door. Cool air slid by his ankles and into the warm house. "Hey there," he said, letting a small laugh soften his voice. He looked left and right down the road again, and then back to the short figure in the cape. "Where's your parent? Where's your guardian?" The child said nothing. The mask stared. Behind the hollow eyes there was only shadow. Frank rubbed at his jaw with 2 fingers. He felt silly talking to a silent mask on his own step. He also felt the little tug that comes when someone refuses to answer and you cannot tell if they did not hear you, did not understand you, or simply did not care to speak. "Listen," he said. "We don't do Halloween here. You know that, right? There aren't any treats at this house. There aren't any treats on this street." He nodded toward the pillowcase. "You're not going to have much luck." The figure did not move. It was like talking to a scarecrow. Frank gave a tight smile, something meant to end a conversation that had not really started, and closed the door. The latch clicked into place. He stood for a second with his hands still on the knob. It felt too quiet after the quick run of the bell. He told himself to let it go, and went back toward his study. The bell went again. This time the sound came in one long, rude burst. He spun on his heel, his mouth already open to say something sharp. He opened the door in one hard motion and found the small figure exactly where it had been. "What's your problem?" he snapped. "Didn't you hear me the first time? You speak English?" The mask looked up at him. The little hand held the pillowcase tighter. Frank caught a faint smell then, like old pennies and damp leaves. It moved through the air in a thin line and vanished, the way a sewer smell sometimes drifts up from a drain and then is gone again. He frowned before he could help himself. The pillowcase looked heavy. The bottom of the fabric sagged and seemed darker than the rest, as if something had soaked it. "Enough," he said, trying to sound like a father aiming a warning at a child who was not his. "This is private property. You need to go get your mother or whoever you belong to. If you don't, I'll call the police." He closed the door harder. A thin rattle ran through the glass next to the frame. He stood in the hall with his hands still clenched. He heard nothing outside for a long half-minute. A small relief spread across his shoulders, then curled back in as the bell started again, fast and stubborn. He could almost see the small finger jabbing the lit circle over and over. He did not want to open the door a third time and say the same words again. He also did not want to call the police over a kid in a costume. It felt like the wrong sort of story to be the center of in a small town. He went back to his study and sat down. He picked up his phone and searched for the number for Child Protective Services. He told himself that this was the middle ground. This was the sensible choice. He pressed call and waited. A woman answered. Her voice was calm. He told her his address. He explained. "There's a child on my porch," he said. "He's been there for quite a while. He won't speak to me. He's alone as far as I can tell." She asked for a name. He did not have one. She asked for the child's address. He did not have that either. He told her the child was in a Halloween costume. He told her the child would not answer any questions. She listened and then said the nearest caseworker was far outside the county. She said someone could follow up in the morning if he could provide a name and a home address. She suggested calling the sheriff's office if he worried about leaving the child there. Frank thanked her in the polite, empty way people thank a person who cannot help them. He hung up. He stared at his phone for a second, then pulled up the number for the sheriff's office and dialed. Deputy Buckley picked up and greeted him with the familiar comfort of a small town where everyone knows who sits where. They made small talk for a few breaths. The deputy asked about Frank's son and the truck stop. Frank said it was fine. The doorbell ran through another wild burst while they talked, the sound tight and sharp through the house. The deputy heard it through the phone and asked a question. "Do you recognize the kid?" he asked. "No," Frank said. "There's a mask." "Is he doing anything else?" "No. Just ringing and standing there." "Is there an adult with him?" "I don't see one." There was a pause, a little tired one, as if the deputy was sitting in a chair and leaning his head back and closing his eyes. "Could you ask him again for his name?" he said. "Maybe he'll talk to you now, if he didn't before. I'll stay on the line." Frank did not like the idea. He did not like feeling watched by a silent child. He did not like the strange smell he thought he had sensed for a moment. He did not like the heaviness in the pillowcase. He did not like the way the cul-de-sac looked when he had opened the door, with the street unrolled like a picture and not a place people lived. But he also did not want to fight with the deputy he saw every few weeks about small things at the tire shop or slow cars on Main Street. He took the phone with him to the door, pressed it between his shoulder and his ear, and turned the knob. "Son," he said, keeping his voice steady. "What's your name? Do you understand me?" The mask turned a little, like a person tipping their head when a sound in the distance changes. The eyes stayed dark. The child did not speak. The air at the threshold felt colder than the air in the yard. The smell came again for a moment, that damp metal scent that reminded him for some reason of the drains behind his appliance store when the summer heat first broke in September. "The deputy wants to talk to you," Frank said, holding the phone out. "He's right here." The child did not lift a hand. Frank leaned forward and tried to hold the phone closer to the mask so the sound would be clear. In the same instant, a small hand shot up and clamped around his wrist. It was a quick, exact grab, as fast as a snake striking. The fingers did not reach all the way around his arm, but the grip was a vice. A hot, cold jolt moved from the spot and ran up his forearm in a wave. He heard the phone fall and hit the concrete step, but the sound seemed very small and very far away compared to the sudden ringing sound now breaking inside his head. He did not know if he shouted. He did not know if he cursed. For 1 second the world shifted, as if the floor tilted and the air turned to thick water. He blinked and tried to shake his arm free. When he could see clearly again, the figure on his step was no longer a child. The small cape and plastic mask were gone. A tall shape filled the doorway, so tall that the top of the frame seemed too low for it. A heavy black cloak hung from its shoulders. The hood was deep. Where a face should have been, something like a carved pumpkin burned from the inside, triangles jagged and moving as fire licked at the soft flesh. The grooves of the ridges glowed as if coals hid under a thin skin. The flame inside the head rolled and curled and did not go out. It released his wrist. He stumbled backward into the house and fell hard onto the polished floor. His hand went numb and then began to throb. He tasted iron under his tongue. Heat rose from the hallway like breath. His house changed with the thing's steps, as if the space obeyed a new set of rules. The air grew wet and heavy. The walls did not seem solid. He had the wild sense that something thick slid under the paint and plaster like the slow weight of a large snake turning over on itself. The furniture looked wrong. It held shapes that huddled and watched, shapes that had too many joints in the wrong places and eyes that seemed not to blink. Shadows gathered in corners and formed little knots that looked almost like hands. The smell he had noticed grew strong. It had layers to it now, old coins, wet earth, sour bread left under a sink, and something sharp and sweet, like rot warmed by sun. The tall figure stepped into the light from the study lamp. The carved head changed as he watched. Orange flesh blackened and sank back, leaving a frame of charred ribs around a skull-like face. The inside glow stayed, but moved deeper, as though the fire now burned behind the eyes instead of in the mask itself. The eyes did not look alive, but they saw him. He felt their weight settle on him the way a heavy coat can settle over your shoulders in winter. He tried to stand. His wrist cried out when he put weight on his hand. He rolled to his side and pushed himself up with his other arm. The tall figure moved nothing but its head. The insects came next. He did not see where they came from. He only knew that the air near the thing suddenly filled with a soft, busy buzz, and the lines of their flight wrote a black script around the sagging pillowcase the figure carried. He knew without wanting to know that the dark wet at the bottom of the bag was not rainwater or soda or anything clean. It dripped in a slow rhythm. It patted the floor. Each drop seemed too heavy, as if gravity had more hold on it than on other things. The doorbell rang. The note leaped into the house like a blade dragging across metal, then changed shape. It split the way a simple sound splits when it passes through a fan. It stretched into a rough voice that did not come from the figure's head or chest. It came from the air all around him, from the house itself now that the house had become whatever it was in that moment. The words were not in any language he knew, but they made sense inside him anyway, the way an old tune makes sense even if you cannot name it. The sense of the words was like this. You do not understand what this night is. You thought you could lock a door and keep it out. You thought you could make a rule and cancel a promise your people made long before they built your churches. You decided the night was about things you fear from your book. You were wrong. This night is older than your arguments. People used to light small lights and say to the old powers, we remember you. They gave a small thing so a larger thing would not be taken. You cut the cord. You tried to take without giving. So now we take what was promised. We take what you love most. Frank shook his head. A thick band seemed to tighten around his chest. He could hear his own breath drag. His skin broke into gooseflesh, and then into something worse. He watched small blisters swell up on his forearm where the tall thing's fingers had been. They rose like pearls and then burst in quick wet pops. He pressed his lips together to stop any sound from coming out. His mind told him this could not be real. His eyes told him it was happening. His nose told him not to breathe too deep. The tall figure lifted the pillowcase. The insects thickened and wove in a dark cloud around the wet cloth. The bag's shape did not change even as it rose, as if whatever weighed it pulled straight down through the fabric and into the earth. The figure reached inside. It did not reach like a person searching for a tool. It reached like a butcher taking hold of a handle. The long arm bent at the elbow. The hand closed on something inside the bag. The thing began to pull. The fabric twisted around the weight. Frank saw coarse strands near the opening and understood what the hand had found and where it was holding. No, he said. The words scraped out of him. It did not sound like his voice. No. No. No, please. He had called his son 5 times that evening. He had thought of him standing at the counter in the truck stop and tapping a pen against the receipt. He had thought of him wearing a baseball cap backward and grinning when he was a boy. He had thought of the old photograph in a box somewhere of Felix standing in a cheap plastic mask that looked like a jack-o'-lantern. The same kind of cheap mask now burned away in front of him. He felt the cold idea sink in like a nail. He moved forward on his knees without meaning to. He held out his good hand. He tried to say the deputy's name. He tried to say God's name. The tall thing only watched him. It lifted the weight higher. The wet cloth stuck and then slid. He saw more of the coarse strands and the curve of something pale under them. His breath hitched. His eyes watered. His mouth opened. The sound that came out of him did not feel like it had ever lived in his body before. It tore its way up and out and into the night. Neighbors heard it. Lights came on up and down the circle. Curtains moved. Someone said a name in a bedroom and asked what that sound was. Someone lifted a phone. Someone chose not to, because people always choose both things in moments like this. The sound of the doorbell, or the thing that had become the doorbell, changed again. It shortened and fell into a steady rhythm. It sounded like footsteps on a porch and hands on a button and a finger that would not tire. In another house, a woman named Esther Calhoun dropped her dentures into a glass of blue liquid and wiped her hands on a neat towel. She wore a silk nightgown and slippers from the catalog her sister liked. She liked early bedtimes. Years of getting up before dawn to start school days had set a clock inside her she could not change. Her husband had fallen asleep in the other room with the television on low, light from an old black and white western flickering against his glasses. Esther walked down the hallway and turned off the lamp by the framed family photographs. The house folded into a soft darkness that had nothing to do with fear. She was about to turn the latch on the front door, the little habit she always did before she went to bed, when the bell rang several times in a row. She paused. People in Bigalow County did not ring doorbells on October nights. That rule had been drilled in and held. She felt a small annoyance and a small worry touch each other in her chest. She put one palm against the door and leaned to the peephole. The street looked very clean through the round glass. Porch lights sat like pale coins on velvet. The air was still. She squinted a little and reached for the chain, more to clear the habit from her hands than to open the door. On another porch in that circle, something tall and cloaked waited with a heavy bag in one hand and a long patience gathered all around it. The bag dripped. The insects followed. The old promise held. The small lights people used to set out were dark. The taking continued house to house, in a town that had told itself it could set a rule against a night that did not belong to it. I used to think the world's big questions had answers, that wise people somewhere had cracked the code and were just waiting to pass it down. After enough time in the dark, you learn most of that talk is noise. People guess. People repeat what sounds deep. But the night doesn't care what anyone says. The night only cares what you are when no one is looking. That lesson finds you faster when you sleep under open sky. I tried to stay in places with light, under a street lamp, near a window, outside a late open shop, because shadows feel heavier when you live without a door. Still, even the brightest bulb throws a black edge. Some nights I move from one pool of light to the next like a fish going from one safe rock to another, catching my breath in between. I didn't always live this way. I wasn't born to it. Blame was easy at first. I blamed my father and his need to lose money in the back room of a dingy place with cards and smoke and fake smiles. He burned through what little we had, and the fire never went out. I was 16 when the couch surfing ended and the floor started to look like a bed. That was 10 years ago. I've had birthdays, winters, and flu seasons since then. I've had kind strangers and cruel ones. But mostly I've had myself. You get used to the smell people try not to notice. Skin that never quite dries after rain, clothes rinsed in a bathroom sink, the sour edge of cheap rum on the nights you can't stop shivering. You get used to eyes sliding away. You get used to walking alone because too many voices make you forget how to hear your own. There are days when I can smile at a bus driver or thank a clerk for letting me warm up near the coffee. And there are days when I carry everything I am like a bruise. On those days I want to sit where no one will see me and let the broken pieces rattle without trying to press them back together. It was a raw October night, the kind where wind keeps its teeth. My coat was a gift from a donation bin and loved by many before me. The lining was thin. My hands had learned to hide inside the sleeves when they went numb. In my pack I had one of those shiny emergency blankets, the kind that crinkle like foil and hold in your heat, but I didn't pull it out. I told myself to keep walking. Movement makes warmth. The main road was mostly empty. A liquor store buzzed with a tired red sign. A Vietnamese diner glowed soft and yellow through fogged windows. Between them was an alley. A lamp near the sidewalk threw a wedge of light across the first few yards. Beyond that was a darker strip where the bulb had been kicked or broken. The alley smelled like sour milk and bread that had tried to live too long. Damp cardboard, soft garbage bags, a wet scrape of something spilled and dried and spilled again. It wasn't welcoming, but it was shelter. Two metal dumpsters sat across from each other. When you sleep outside, you learn to spot the cardboard bin by habit. It's a small fortune on nights like this. I climbed the short step and leaned in. The smell was stale paper with a memory of everything that once touched it. I pulled out two big flattened boxes, slid them to the ground, and set them side by side to make a floor. Then I fished out two more boxes and opened them into their old shapes. No tape, so I overlapped the flaps and tucked them. It wouldn't win prizes, but standing there in the thin light, I felt like a builder. I set one long box on top of the flattened pair with its open end toward the alley. I slid the second box over the first to make a deeper tunnel and pressed both against the wall so the wind would have to work to get under them. It wasn't much, but I could crawl in, wrap up, and be off the ground. Sometimes. A little less cold feels like luxury. Wind came down the alley in sudden pushes, lifting the far end of the cardboard like a lid. I wasn't worried. Once I was inside, my weight would hold it. But wind is a drummer. and a flapping box is a drum. Sound draws attention. That's the thought that plays at the edge of sleep when you live outside. There are people in this world who see a person on the ground and decide to solve their boredom on the nearest body. Most of them are young, and most of them travel in packs. I've heard about a game where they try to drop you with one punch. I don't know if it's a story or a headline, but the idea is enough. You sleep with your ears on. Before I crawled in, a thin feeling touched the back of my neck. It was like a whisper you don't catch, only the breath of it. Cool as if someone had lifted my hair, though I keep it short. I turned fast, quicker than I'd moved all day, and stared toward the blind end of the alley. There was nothing to see but the dark that felt thicker than it looked. I listened. A car slid past on the street. A loose sign creaked. The broken lamp hummed the way broken things do. No footsteps. No voices. I told myself to stop it with the nerves. Tell yourself the truth, I said, the way you say it to a kid. There's danger in the world, but you don't have to feed the fear. Fear, if you let it run the show, eats more than any cold night ever could. Still, the feeling stuck like a burr. I crawled into the long box. The emergency blanket crackled as I pulled it over me. The sound was too bright in the small space, too close to my ears, so I wrapped it tight to stop the noise. I left my feet pointed toward the opening, neck stretched so I could see a slice of alley. The wedge of light from the street made a gray triangle. Beyond that, the dark waited like ink poured into a jar. Sleep took 2 steps toward me and then turned away. My body was tired enough to drop. My mind kept opening its eyes. I closed mine and counted breaths. I opened them and checked the dark. Sometimes you can feel another person enter a room even if you don't hear them. The air changes. It was like that, some quiet shift I couldn't prove. I shut my eyes hard until I felt the muscles in my face push back. When I looked again, something in the dark had changed. A smooth movement, like a hand passing behind a curtain. The gray triangle from the street dimmed, as if the light itself had taken a step back. My mouth opened on a breath that stuck halfway. I forced it the rest of the way down, and told myself not to make a sound. Another car whispered by the alley mouth. The normal noise of it was a rope to grab. I held it. I told myself to stare at the street end and not at the black behind me. I told myself that the night would end, the cold would lift, the sun would come. I tried to think about soup. I tried to think about the slow-way coffee steam curls. I tried not to think about the closet. When I was in grade school, a boy in my class told us his brother had locked him in their bedroom closet while their mom was out. It was dark in there, no light under the door. He said something spoke to him, not loud but near, and he pounded the door until his hands were raw. His palms looked like he had pressed them into gravel. His mom grounded the brother, not for locking him in, but because of the damage to the door and to those hands. After that I avoided any space I couldn't exit in 2 steps. I thought I'd grown out of it. Maybe you never grow out of what fear teaches you. You just pretend you did. A soft sound came from the dark end of the alley. It was small, but the kind of small that lives under the skin, like when a house settles and your bones mistake it for a foot on the stairs. I sat up fast and smacked my head on the top of the box. The shock made a bright flash in my vision. By the time the light in my eyes faded, a new light was rising at the back of the alley, not white or gold, but a dull, yellow rim, the color of a candle seen through thick glass. It drew itself up the wall slowly, like someone pulling a shade. The halo climbed and climbed until it was taller than a person. It kept climbing until I couldn't see the top. The glow wasn't steady. It throbbed, dim to bright, bright to dim, a heartbeat reversed. Old fear pushed the air out of my lungs and forgot to let it back in. I shuffled backward until my shoulders hit metal. The foil blanket whispered too loud in my ears. I didn't want to run because running meant going closer to the dark. I didn't want to stay because staying meant waiting for the dark to come to me. Fear is a bad math that way. Whatever answer you choose, it tells you it's wrong. The wind hit the boxes like a hand. The front one buckled and dropped hard toward my feet. Instinct folded my legs up tight. The collapsed cardboard slid and knocked against my ankles. Through the bend, the alley's far end opened wider. The dark shape there was larger now, not a figure, not a person, but a kind of gathering, a cloud of shadow with that slow, sick light licking its edges. I pulled my knees to my chest and pressed my back to the dumpster. Sound filled the space. The whisper that had touched my neck multiplied and turned up. It was like 1,000 voices trying to speak through a radio tuned to empty space, a rush of static with words buried in it. It crawled under my hands and into my head. I clapped my palms over my ears and still felt it in my teeth. The box tugged under me. The tug turned to a hard pull. Then the whole thing ripped away, and I fell forward, hands slapping the cold concrete. I scrambled on knees and elbows, but the air itself felt thick, like wading in water. The yellow-gray glow spun around me. The dark behind it rolled like a storm that couldn't find a sky to live in. Up close, it had no face and too many faces. It had no shape until you stared at it, and then it had the shape of whatever your fear remembered. The glow traced edges that weren't there, and then moved them. If beauty and terror share anything, it's the way you forget yourself in the middle of them. I was a small thing inside a large thing, and I didn't know how to be anything else. A voice came out of it. Not a single voice, but layers torn and stitched together, words burned and cooled and burned again. Self, it said, drawn out and cracked, as if the word had been left out in the weather. You will meet, self. The sound made me think of a tire peeling across asphalt, and then deflating. It made me think of a match flaring and sinking to smoke. It made me think of a man who hadn't shaved in days trying to speak without moving his mouth. But there was no man. There was only the roll of dark like waves folding back on themselves. I turned to run toward the street, but the alley stretched wrong. Wherever I looked, the dark was there first, like a trick in a funhouse that isn't fun. I spun, dizzy, then sank down and put my hands on the cold ground to feel something that didn't shift. Where are you, self? The voice asked. It sounded like a campfire gasping for its last breath. You are ghost. Phantom. Lost man. The words weren't said in anger. They weren't cruel. They were heavy. That almost made it worse. I don't understand, I said. My voice was the voice you have in a nightmare, the one that doesn't lift past your teeth. What do you want? The dark turned inward, flipped itself, and then turned again, quickening until the movement blurred. Wind pushed hard against my chest. I put my forearms over my face, and the sound climbed until the noise felt like a hand pressing my head down. Then everything stopped at once, like someone had cut the cord on the world. The quiet was a slap. The dark leaned in. It hit like a wave, and I was under it. Not drowning, crushed. Not with pain, without any room to be. I couldn't tell where my skin ended. I couldn't tell what part of me was feeling, and what part was watching. Visions came fast and close, too many to count and too tangled to tell apart. I knew them the way you know a scar without looking. I recognized places I had avoided remembering. I don't have language for all of it. I think that's the point. Some things you see past words, and you pay for them by never being able to explain. It might have been a minute. It might have been the length of a night. When it lifted, I was on my back, looking up at a square of blue. The alley smelled like it always did, only now the morning sun had warmed it. Somewhere a truck downshifted. Somewhere a bird insisted the day had started. My face was wet with tears I didn't remember making. At the far end of the alley, where the broken lamp cast its tired shadow, a tall rectangle leaned against the wall. It hadn't been there before. It looked like a door, but brighter, like it held light instead of blocked it. When I squinted, I saw it wasn't a door. It was a mirror. The wood around it was blackened and blistered, as if it had been pulled out of a fire and cooled in the wind. The glass was clear, and too clear. When I looked into it, I didn't see a trick or a ghost. I saw my face, blurred where tears still sat, gaunt from too many missed meals, eyes wide with the look of someone who has finally listened. I sat there a long time, legs crossed, hands on my knees, like a student waiting for a lesson. The image in the glass waited with me. It didn't judge. It didn't nod. It reflected, which is the only honest thing a mirror can do. Memory arranged itself without my help. I remembered the bad luck and the worst choices. I remembered how easy it had been to point at a father who burned money and never at the son who kept lighting smaller fires afterward. I remembered how the world had offered me hard hands and open doors, and how often I had chosen the hands because it felt good to have a reason to fall down. I remembered a pocket of relief found too often at the bottom of a cheap bottle. I remembered telling myself that the world was against me because the idea that I was against myself was too hard to hold. I understood something I didn't want. No one had pushed me under that wave. No one had dragged me to the alley. I had brought myself here, one small step at a time. A person can lose everything and still carry blame carefully, saving it for others. But blame is heavy. You can set it down anytime. The only thing you can't set down is yourself. The mirror didn't speak. It didn't need to. The thing in the night had done all the talking. It had told me the truth in the only voice I would hear, the voice that sounded like fear and felt like the edge of something I couldn't live past. It had said, "Meet yourself." It had said, "You are not what you say when the sun is out. You are what you choose when no one is watching." I wanted to stand up and smash the glass. I wanted to make the frame splinter and burn it in the street. I wanted to roll the mirror under the dumpster and pretend the night had never happened. But I knew if I broke this one, there would be another. Maybe in another city. Maybe at the bottom of another bottle. Maybe in the eyes of someone I hurt on a day I couldn't bear myself. The mirror isn't a thing you find. It's a thing that finds you when you run out of places to stand without seeing. I think the mirror shows up because we spend so long avoiding it. We tell stories about monsters and shadows. We say something out there is waiting for us in the dark. We say if we walk in groups and carry light and lock our doors we will be safe. Those things help in the world with other people. But the dark you bring with you sits wherever you sit. It waits in your pockets. It follows you from job to job and bed to bed. It is patient. I pulled my pack closer and checked what I had. The emergency blanket, wrinkled and bright. An extra pair of socks that weren't dry but weren't as wet as the ones on my feet. A bar of soap. A folded photo that had lived in my pocket so long the edges had become soft, and the colors had rubbed to pastels. In the picture I am young and pretending not to smile because I thought that made me look older. My father is behind me, one hand on my shoulder, eyes already halfway to the place where they would learn to lose. He looks tired. He looks like a man who wants the day to change without him having to change with it. I stood and walked to the mirror. Up close, I could see hairline cracks in the frame, little veins of black where fire had crawled. The glass had tiny specks the sun picked out like stars in daylight. My reflection wavered just a little, as if heat moved between me and it. I lifted a hand. My reflection lifted a hand. Our fingers met on the surface. The glass was cooler than the air. "I see you," I said. It felt simple and also like a confession. Saying it didn't make me better. It didn't put a roof over my head or meals in my day. But it kept me from lying to myself in a way that had cost me more than any winter. I stepped back. The mirror didn't vanish. It didn't turn to smoke. It stood there, dumb and honest. The alley was a place again, not a mouth. The lamp at the street hummed. A bus sighed to a stop, and then shouldered its way forward. Two men walked past, arguing softly about some game. A woman pushed a stroller while the baby inside followed the sun patches with his eyes. The world kept on, which is the world's most common miracle. I left the alley. At the curb I looked back. From the sidewalk, the mirror looked like exactly what it was. When headlights swung across it, it flashed like a signal. Then the light moved on. I wondered if anyone else would see it, or if it was a thing only some of us ever meet. Maybe it shows up where it's needed, then waits. Maybe it shows up for everyone, and most people never look long enough to notice. I walked without hurrying. I let the sun touch my face. I kept to the side of the street where the light lay and stepped through the shadows without flinching. Fear likes to tell you it is a storm you must outrun. It can also be a lamp. It can tell you where the edges are. It can show you the shape of the hole before you fall into it. You don't beat fear by insisting it's nothing. You beat it by saying hello and walking anyway. Maybe you don't need a night like mine to learn that. I hope you don't. But if the dark ever stands at the end of your room and speaks in a voice that sounds like fire losing its air, if it says the one word it saved for last, self, don't spend your breath denying it. Don't throw your fists at glass. Don't look for a monster to fight. Sit down. Put your hands on your knees. Say, I see you. That's the only place I've found where the night loosens its grip. I won't make promises. I won't say I walked out of that alley a new man and never looked back. Change isn't a coin you flip. It's pushing against your old weight every day until one morning you wake up and realize the weight has moved an inch. Some days I fall into the same holes. Some days I blame the same old faces. On those days, the mirror waits at the edge of my eye. I don't have to find it. It finds me. And I start over. If this sounds like a warning, let it be one worth hearing. People will tell you fear is fake, that courage is something you put on like a jacket, that the dark can be broken by smiling at it. Those people mean well. They want you to feel strong. Strength is good. But don't let anyone convince you that the thing that shakes your hands and steals your sleep is nothing. Fear is real. It is a tool and a trap. It will keep you from stepping in front of a bus, and it will keep you from stepping through a door that leads to your life. Learn which is which. When the sun goes down, and your thoughts get loud, when the room is full of your own voice and none of it is kind, remember this: sometimes the shadow at the end of the hall is only the shape of you that you haven't met yet. And when it finally speaks, try to listen without running. I keep walking. I keep choosing the lit side of the street when I can and stepping through the dark when I must. I keep a small list in my head of things that feel like making a bed out of boxes, a warm cup between my hands, a kind cashier who counts out change slow so my fingers don't fumble, a bench that faces east, a public library door propped open. I don't pray much, but on good days I say thank you under my breath. Not for gifts. For chances. As for the alley, I don't know if someone moved the mirror or if it moved itself. Maybe it waits for the next set of eyes. Maybe it turns up in closets and hospital rooms and empty apartments and beer-slicked bar floors. Maybe the charred frame is only mine. Maybe yours will be clean wood or metal or no frame at all. Whatever it is, if you see it, know that you're not being punished. You're being told the only truth that can help. The person you drag into every place is the person you have to learn how to carry. Not perfectly. Just for one more block. That's all I have. Not wisdom. Not an answer about death or the end. Just a night when the dark stepped out where I could see it and said, Self. And a morning when the light came back and I said, I see you. And meant it. I drove into my hometown on a Thursday afternoon with rain on the windshield and old songs on the radio. The kind of rain that doesn't rush you. It hangs in the air and turns everything soft and gray. The courthouse dome looked like it had been dipped in silver. The sidewalks were shiny. Even the old brick storefronts seemed to lean back and breathe. I hadn't been back for a long time. My mother passed in June after a rough year. The last real job left to me was to sort through what was left in her storage unit before the end of the month. Numbers and keys, that's what grief turns into if you let it. A code for the gate. A slot number. A deadline. I grabbed a coffee from the bakery and stood under their awning until the worst of the downpour cooled into a steady hush, then drove across town to the warehouse row where every unit looks like every other unit. The roll-up door screeched the way roll-up doors are born to screech. I stood in the opening and let that cool storage unit air lift the smell of dust and cardboard. Inside, there were boxes stacked to the rafters, a lace of old furniture legs, 2 lamps without shades, a quilt in a clear bag with the tape peeling up, a stack of framed photos wrapped in newspaper from 3 summers ago. I pulled a chain and a single bulb came to life over me. A circle of warm light in the long rectangle of the unit. Outside, the rain drummed on the corrugated roof and the building answered in a low hum. I worked through the easy stuff first. Kitchen. Books. Christmas. I made a pile for donation and a pile to keep and a pile for. Asked my brothers. For a while I forgot why the rain sounded so good until my hands were black with cardboard ink and I wiped them on my jeans like a kid. That's when I saw it. The brown carton pushed behind a chest of drawers that used to be in our hallway when I was 10. The chest's top had a water ring, I remembered. On the box, in my mother's neat block letters. June's pantry. June was my grandmother, Nana June. My mother kept her things packed gentle and tight, just like Nana had kept flour and sugar in labeled jars and life in labeled habits. I slid the box into the light and sat on a wooden crate. The tape had already let go of the cardboard. It only took my thumbnail to lift it. Inside were kitchen smells that live longer than people. Cinnamon. A little vanilla that had leaked once and dried. Something that might have been peppermint. I saw a red-rimmed pie tin, 2 old dish towels with blue stripes, a chipped ceramic rooster that used to sit by a little radio in her kitchen, a spiral notebook with recipes in careful hand. Under all that, wrapped in old grocery bags, there was a glass jar. I knew the jar before I had it out. It was squat and round with the kind of lid people don't sell anymore. Red metal, knurled around the edge so even a soapy hand could open it. The glass had vertical flutes like a carnival glass bowl without the color. The lid had a small scratch where a ring must have caught and skidded. I could see it back on her counter in my head, right of the sink, left of the toaster. It always sat there, year-round, full of hard candy. The jar was empty now. Or almost empty. A few stray sugar crystals clung to the bottom. The lid still held a faint smell when I lifted it, like peppermint and old paper and a clean house. It hit me the way smells do. I was 8 again with a wet jacket, rain in my hair, and a candy pressed into my palm with a whispered, "Don't tell your mother." Peppermints in summer. Butterscotch in winter. Root beer barrels in a coffee cup if you were special and your mother wasn't looking. I stood there with the jar in my hands for a long time, listening to the rain and the building hum. This was nothing more than glass and a red lid and sugar ghosts. It felt heavy anyway. I put the jar on the passenger seat and buckled it in like a joke I didn't say out loud. At a red light I tapped the lid with a fingertip the way you do without knowing you're doing it. It made a soft, tinny sound. I took the long way back to the motel and drove past the old chain of places your brain still calls by names that aren't there anymore. Mrs. Bell's Bakery. Tucker's Hardware. The theater with the 2 screens. Half the signs were new. Half of what was new looked old on purpose. That's how towns keep their balance. That night I brought the jar up to the room with my duffel. Habit, I guess. It sat on the little round motel table with the lid off while I answered email and put off sleep. Somewhere after midnight I turned off the lamp and let the rain be the only sound. The jar glowed a little in the dark because the streetlight outside showed it how. I meant to drive back the next morning and make a real dent in the unit, but a job I do from my laptop ran late, and then I found myself driving across town to see the house I grew up in. I parked in front of the last elm on Sycamore Street and just sat. The house had a different color and a different porch light, but the window in the living room was the same. I could picture the couch and the place where I sat with a bowl of popcorn balanced on my knees while the adults laughed in the kitchen louder than they realized because the sink was running. When I think of Halloween, I don't think of costumes first. I think of that kitchen. My grandmother with her sleeves rolled, the blue striped towel over one shoulder, a large mixing bowl she called a wash pan, even when there wasn't water in it. She had a way of making October feel like a thing you could stand inside. Part of it was the weather. Part of it was her. She didn't like waste. Candy was counted and sorted. Apples got their own bowl. Anything homemade from a neighbor she knew was set aside for later. My mother inspected every wrapper because one time on the news there had been a story, and that was enough to make it a rule forever. The bowl for, okay, sat by the jar. The bowl for, ask first, sat near the window by the plant. Nana didn't tell scary stories to us like other people did. She told practical ones. Don't run so hard on wet leaves. Your feet will go out from under you and your head will find the one rock in the yard. Don't chew a hard candy until it's small, or you'll crack a tooth. Don't drink too fast when you've been running. You'll give yourself a pain that feels worse than it is. In October, she let a little showmanship out. One year she bought a plastic Halloween mask with eye holes too far apart for any human face and popped out from around the hallway with it. One year she bought a wind-up set of chattering teeth from the dime store. She worked that crank and set the teeth on the counter, and they did their little dance while my little brother squealed and clapped. I remember her laugh more than the clatter of plastic. I remember the way she put the teeth back in their cardboard box when we were done, as if even toys need a place to rest. I stayed through the weekend longer than I meant to. Every morning I unlocked the unit and made one more small order out of what was left. Every evening I drove the slow way back and watched the town be itself. I ate 2 dinners in the same diner and ordered the same thing both nights and felt like I was doing something on purpose. The jar rode with me wherever I went. It didn't belong in the unit once I'd found it. It didn't belong back in my mother's old house that wasn't ours anymore. It belonged in my passenger seat while the rain did its work outside. On the last night, I brought the jar home. Home is a 2-hour drive from Maple Ridge, past fields, then suburbs, then a long stretch of highway that doesn't ask anything of you but attention and fuel. I passed the state line with the jar buckled in and laughed at myself again. The laugh made me feel a little less alone. My wife, Sherry, met me at the door with a hug and a smell of laundry and basil from the plant she keeps by the sink. We have a small house where the living room and kitchen are close enough that you can have one conversation and not shout. Our daughter, Mia, is 16 and has a way of greeting you that includes a word and a shoulder bump. She did both and took the smaller of the 2 bags from my hand without me asking. "What's that?" Sherry said, pointing with her chin at the glass in my left hand. "Found it in Mom's storage," I said. "Nana's candy jar." "Oh my God!" Sherry said. The red lid. Mia came in from the hallway. "Who's what?" I set the jar on the counter, and even empty it changed the room. Old things do that. They hold their own shadows. "This sat on my grandmother's counter," I said. "There was always something in it. I might fill it again." "With what?" Mia said. "Peppermints," I said. "Or butterscotch." "Nana June had the cleanest kitchen I have ever seen," Sherry said. "I can smell it thinking about it." "Pine cleaner and coffee," I said. "And bread. She cleaned like it was a religion." "She cleaned like poor people clean," Sherry said, not unkindly. Everything had to last. We set the jar on our counter, and Sherry lit the small lamp we keep near the cookbooks. The jar looked like it belonged there. The red lid made the rest of the kitchen warmer the way a little bit of color does. That first night, the jar was just a jar. I washed my hands and tied on an apron and cooked pasta with a tomato sauce that was more garlic than tomato. The 3 of us sat and ate and talked about school and work and the 2 weeks until Halloween. Rain moved in again and did that steady thing on the roof. I turned the lamp lower and the room took on that late October feeling I like, where things are quiet but they feel awake. We went to bed around 11 and I read for a while with the jar in the kitchen and felt fine. I woke at 3 in the morning with a sound in my ear. Not a sharp sound. Not a frightening one. A sound that didn't belong to the night I was in. It took a few seconds to understand what I was hearing. Not wind. Not rain. A faint crinkle, like paper remembered paper. Like someone folding a candy wrapper between 2 fingers and letting it go no louder than their own breath. I lay still with my hand on the edge of the sheet. I have the sort of mind that likes to list what a sound might be, and I listed a few things. A mouse in the baseboard. A receipt settling in the trash. The ice maker thinking a thought. The house has told me things for years. Most of them are small and true. I convinced myself the sound belonged to one of those true small things, rolled over, and slept hard. At breakfast I didn't mention anything. No point. We all had our own mornings to build. Sherry had a video call. Mia had a test in second period she had worried about for 2 days. I poured coffee into a mug that has a chip in the rim that my lip knows how to avoid and looked at the jar because that's what my eyes wanted to do while my head was waking up. There was something inside. I set the mug down and walked to the counter the way you walk to a thing you haven't decided what to think about. It was a wrapper. Not a wrapper I recognized from this century. It had the look of something printed when colors were a little less certain and fonts had more flourishes. The paper was thicker than the stuff that holds candy now. Around it there were 3 small sugar grains like a constellation. "What's up?" Sherry said from the hallway, seeing me standing weird. "There's a wrapper," I said. "In the jar?" "In the jar." She came over with her hair up and eyes bright with morning. She looked into the glass and breathed in through her nose the way you do when you want a smell to tell you something. "Huh," she said. "That looks like, you know those little cinnamon hard candies? My grandma called them Red Hots. Not like the box. The originals." I unscrewed the lid and lifted the wrapper out. It was folded in a neat half. There was a faint, warm smell on it like cinnamon and something else. Not dust. Not mold. That small clean smell in a warm kitchen with rain just past the screen door. It felt like feeling a word on your tongue before you remember how to say it. "I didn't put that in there," I said, because that was the sentence the morning needed. "I didn't either," Sherry said. "Mia?" Mia came in with her backpack on one shoulder and made a face at the coffee smell. "I didn't touch your spooky jar," she said, and kissed Sherry on the cheek on her way to the door. We left the wrapper on the counter in the light like a clue. I told myself there was an ordinary reason and made 2 or 3 ordinary reasons up. The jar had been boxed with things. The wrapper stuck to something and let go now. The lid had not been as tight as I thought. The ideas weren't convincing, but they didn't need to be. I needed to go to work and not be a person who stared at glass. That night the rain came back with the same patience as before. We ate leftovers, we swept, we put a little bowl of candy on the counter because we were that close to Halloween and it felt right. Not much. A handful of mini bars. A few rolls of hard candies from a bag I bought in a burst of nostalgia. I set the bowl next to the jar. I watched a show Sherry likes and pretended to pay attention. I went to bed earlier than usual and told myself good job out loud in the mirror for no reason other than the funny way it sounded. At 3 again, or near it, the sound woke me. Not loud. Wrapped in the kind of quiet the night holds in its hands with care. A crinkle. A small tap. Another tap like the sound a lid makes when it settles. I got up and walked through the living room without turning on any lights. Street light gave me enough to not stub a toe. The light over the kitchen sink was one of those bulbs that never really goes all the way off. It leaves the smallest hint of itself behind so your eyes have somewhere to go. The jar sat on the counter where it had sat the night before. The red lid looked darker in the half-light. Before I was close enough to touch it, I could smell something that made me slow down. Not cinnamon. Peppermint. A clean mint that lives in your nose and opens a drawer in your chest and says breathe here. I reached the counter and put my fingers on the glass the way you might touch a sleeping baby's head, halfway in love and halfway making sure it's real. The jar was cool. I unscrewed the lid. There was a wrapper inside then too, tucked into the curve of the glass as if someone had placed it with care. This one was striped, white and green. The paper had that old thickness again. I brought it to my nose and felt dumb and happy for doing so. Mint. That sharp sweet that says winter and breath and a woman putting a candy in your palm when you've come in from the cold, and your nose is pink. I stood in the quiet and told the air I didn't believe in ghosts not because I needed the air to know but because my own ears needed to hear what my mouth believed. Then I told the air thank you. The second sentence rang truer than the first. In the morning I put both wrappers side by side on the counter and took a picture with my phone because feeling something and documenting it are different animals, and sometimes you need both. I went to work. I wrote an email about a small problem with a good customer and felt steady about it. The steady feeling came from a glass jar at home and a red lid. I knew that and didn't mind. The days moved through that week like well-behaved dogs. Work. Dinner. Small chores that make a house clink in the right way. Sherry bought pumpkins even though we did not have little kids. Mia drew a face on one with a marker and made it look like a person who lives on late-night TV. On Thursday I took the trash out and stood under the smallest bit of star I could see between clouds and wires and thought of the jar sitting 3 rooms away like a tiny lighthouse that glows without anyone asking it to. I went to bed with my throat feeling warm. I think it was peppermint that did that. Or thinking about peppermint. That's the same sometimes. Friday night the sound woke me again, and this time I didn't have to get out of bed to know what it was. I could see it in my head. I could hear the crinkle with my eyes closed. I lay there and let the house tell me its small story, and then I got up because not getting up felt like saying no to something that didn't ask me for anything but a look. In the jar there were 2 wrappers. They were small squares of wax paper tied up like little pillows. The kind that held soft caramels. In the dark I could smell them. I could hear my grandmother say, "Let it melt in your mouth or it will stick to your teeth." In that soft stern voice that kept us alive and kept us from taking more than we should. I set them next to the mint and the cinnamon. 4 small slips of paper like the corner of a map. On Saturday afternoon, Sherry and I drove to the store to get a bag of candy for the house because the kids on our street always start early and end late. It's not a busy street. The neighborhood group coordinates the hours. But there is a stretch in the middle where the porch lights twinkle the same way the wet leaves do, and it feels like a little parade of tiny feet and plastic swords and wings made of tulle and safety pins. I bought a cheap plastic mixing bowl with little ghosts printed on it so I wouldn't use one of our good bowls and worry about it the whole time. Sherry bought a bag of mini chocolate bars, a bag of fruit chews, and a bag of wrapped hard candy with flavor names that sound like somebody's grandpa: root beer, lemon drop, blackberry. We got home and spread it all out on the counter. I always feel like a small king with a small kingdom when the candy is on the counter, and my hands are the ones that set it right. I filled the bowl and turned the extra into zip bags. I put 1 bag in the pantry. I set 2 handfuls of the wrapped hard candy in the old jar because I wanted to see it look the way it used to look. The candy fell in with that cheerful clack candy makes. The red lid went on with a small coaxing turn the way lids like to go on. I stood back and felt something click into place in my head. "They look good in there," Sherry said from the table, looking up from the list she was making. "She'd be proud of you." "I hope so," I said. That night there was no 3 a.m. sound because the jar already held what a jar should. I slept straight through with the rain doing its clockwork. I woke feeling like someone had put a blanket over me and tucked it in just right. On Sunday evening, Mia went to a friend's house to plan costumes. 16 is an age where you can take the parts of childhood that still feel good and turn them a little and make something new. They had decided on something clever that would take almost no money and twice as much eyeliner. I stood at the counter and cut an apple and thought about calling my brother, then didn't. The jar caught the dimming light and gave it back to the room so gently I would have missed it if I hadn't already been looking. Later that night we all ended up in the kitchen at the same time, like families do without trying. Mia made hot chocolate on the stove with milk because she says the packets taste like paper. Sherry prepped a casserole for Monday because Mondays always go better if they come with a plan. I cleaned the sink and stood still long enough to feel the house think. I don't know any other way to say that. Some houses think in short thoughts that come out as creaks. Some consider for a while and hum. "Do you remember the year your grandma made us throw out every homemade popcorn ball because of that story on TV?" Sherry said, smiling. "She called the people to tell them why," I said. "And then she felt bad and baked brownies and took them to their houses. That woman didn't like guilt hanging around." Mia laughed. "You two talk about your grandmas like they were superheroes." "They were," Sherry said. "The kind that knew where the flashlights were when the lights went out." On Monday morning, I woke before the alarm. The house was dark, the sky was undecided, and the quiet was not the kind that wants a person in it. It wanted to be itself. I put on socks and walked to the kitchen anyway. I needed water. That's what I told myself. The fridge door light made the room look like a stage. I drank from a glass and stood with my hip against the counter and didn't think about the jar because I was trying not to think about the jar. Then I smelled something that had nothing to do with mint or cinnamon. A smell that always made me think of Monday mornings in a small house where floors matter. A pine smell. Not the kind they fake in car trees. The kind that comes from a bottle under the sink and a bucket left by the back door. I turned my head and the smell didn't go away. It seemed to come from the jar and the sink and the clean space between. When I stepped closer, I noticed the lid wasn't on straight. Not crazy crooked. Not off. Just not quite sealed. I could have left it. I could have blamed myself for not tightening it and gone back to bed. Instead, I lifted the lid and looked in. On top of the candy we had put in, there were two things we had not. A wrapper like the others, old paper I could have named with my eyes shut now, and a small folded square torn from a recipe card. The edge had lines on it, fainter than the ones in my mother's notebook. The pencil writing was tidy and not new, but not old enough to be brittle. It was one sentence. Check the treats. I held the paper in a way that would not smudge it. I felt silly holding it like that, and then I felt sad for feeling silly. The sentence was one that could be in anyone's hand and in anyone's house and on anyone's mind in October. I stood in the kitchen with my feet on our clean floor and my hand on a note that could have arrived by accident, and decided it didn't. I put the paper in the drawer with the twist ties and the extra rubber bands where you keep the things you need to see later. I sat at the table and rubbed my face with both hands as if I could polish an answer out of my skin. I went back to bed and lay awake until the alarm told me it was morning. It rained again on Tuesday, and that made the day easier. Rain has a way of forgiving you for the things you can't solve. Work was fine. I finished a report that had been too long in the making. I got a text from Mia that said, "Got a 92," and a picture of a paper with a red circle in the corner. I answered with the party horn emoji because my phone brain is happier sometimes than my mouth brain. On the way home I stopped at the grocery store and bought coffee because we were out, and a bag of the cheap peppermints wrapped in cellophane because I wanted to hear candy in a jar again like a person wants to hear a certain song at the end of the day. In the car I sat with the bag open on my lap like a kid. One peppermint unwrapped, cold on my tongue. I let it rest there and watched the rain. It tasted like winter and radios and a woman in an apron saying, "All right, baby, just one more." I drove home with the bag on the passenger seat under the seat belt. I didn't laugh at myself that time. I sang with the radio a little off-key. At home, I poured the peppermints into the jar on top of everything else. The red lid went on like a hat that fit. I set the jar in the center of the counter and rested my palm on the glass for a second. Thank you, I thought again, not sure who I meant. Wednesday night was the last one before Halloween. On our street people start setting up early. Fake spiderwebs appeared on 2 bushes. An inflatable cat with eyes the size of dinner plates blinked in one yard. Our porch got a new bulb so the steps would be safer. I put the bowl of candy by the door and told myself not to hand out too much to the early crowd. I took the garbage out and saw, across the street, Mr. Wagner's porch light on for the first time in months. He's alone since last winter. His daughter lives an hour away. I waved and he waved. It was enough. I went inside and washed my hands and cleaned the sink and looked at the jar and wondered how a person could be homesick and at home at the same time. At 3 in the morning I woke again. The house was the black kind of dark that asks for care. I lay still and listened and heard nothing but the small hum a refrigerator makes when it's happy. I almost turned over and drifted back, but there was a feeling in my chest, a little tilt like the floor on an old porch that warns you before your ankle does. The note in the drawer said sit down if the room tilts. I sat up in bed and swung my feet to the rug like a person who does what he's told by paper. Sherry didn't stir. I walked to the kitchen quiet as I could. Halfway there the smell reached me. Pine. Clean and strong and not from our bottle. Mixed with it, the tiniest sweetness. Molasses maybe? Or caramel. When I rounded the corner the sight slowed me. The jar's lid was off. It sat next to the jar, face down, a circle of red on the counter. Inside the glass, the wrappers had shifted. Not floated. Not twisted. They had been arranged. 4 old ones and a handful of new ones sat in lines that made little bars like a child laying out letters with sticks. In the middle, on top of a peppermint, a square of recipe card with a new pencil sentence. Wait to share. I don't know how long I stood there with my hand on the back of the chair. Long enough for my eyes to water a little. Long enough for my throat to feel like a hand held it, and was kind. I took the paper, folded it once, and put it with the other. I tightened the lid as far as I could without feeling silly. I washed the spot on the counter where the circle had been sitting as if that would make the world square. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the living room and watched the house be itself. At 6 I made coffee, and the sound of it lifting into the pot made me feel like a person in a movie about a person who knows how to live. Sherry came out in a robe and put her hand on my head the way she does when words will make a moment smaller, and left it there. Mia came out like a light turning on. We ate toast and fruit like we were in pictures in the grocery store, and everyone left for their day, and I was the person with a note in his pocket. Halloween fell on a Thursday that year. At 4 the rain started again, patient. At 5 I turned on the porch light and lit 2 little fake candles in the windows so the house looked like a gentler version of itself. At 6 the first small crowd came, the brave and the eager. I gave out 1 piece each because we had 2 bags and a bowl, and more kids always show up than you think will. Sherry came to the door every 3rd ring because she likes to see costumes and say, "Oh wow," with her hands. Mia left to meet her friends with a mask in her back pocket, and a promise to be home by 10. Around 7:30 there was a little rush, the way there always is. A stream of costumes lightning bugging past the hedges. A small girl in a cow suit tried to hand me a leaf because she thought that was how it worked, and I took it, and said thank you and put it in my pocket because that's how that works in this house. A boy in a cape made of an old sheet had the voice and the manners of a prince from a book. A teenager with no costume said, "I'm a disappointment." And I handed him 2 mini bars because it made all of us laugh and then made us a little sad. At 8 the bowl was half full. The jar on the counter was full. The house smelled like wet wool and candy and pine cleaner that wasn't ours. I thought I could feel the glass thinking again, and told myself to stop being dear with my own mind. At 8:15 the doorbell rang in that way it rings when someone outside is not used to pressing a button and holds it too long. I opened the door to 2 small kids I didn't know and a man I had seen once at the park. The girl was in a bee costume with a stripe of electrical tape that had come loose. The boy was something with a mask pushed up on his head because it was raining, and he wanted to see. The man smiled the way people smile when they're trying to be less tired than they are. We did the little lines we do. Trick or treat. Happy Halloween. Thank you. As they turned to go he said, "Hold on," to the boy and shifted the paper sack from one hand to the other to dig for something, and in the changeover the bag ripped at the seam. Half of the candy in it slid out onto our porch boards and into the wet. We all did that panicked helpful crouch people do when bags rip, grabbing and scooping and saying, "Oh no," and "It's okay," at the same time. As I handed back a handful of mini bars, I saw it. A little cluster of homemade cookies wrapped in plastic wrap, tied with an orange ribbon. My hand did a thing before my head did. I did not put them in the boy's bag. I held them. The man saw my hand hesitate. His face changed. People are proud and they are careful. "The neighbor gave them," he said. "She said she made extra. She might be lovely," I said, and heard my own voice choose the gentlest way to say the next part. "But tonight we try to stick to wrappers. Just because, you know how it is." I expected him to be offended. He wasn't. His face changed again the way water changes when you put your hand in it. He nodded. "You're right," he said, and turned to the kids. "Tell the nice man thank you." "Thank you," they said in a small chorus. I put 3 extra wrapped pieces in the boy's bag because the world should balance where it can. The man looked like he wanted to say sorry and thank you at the same time and couldn't choose, so he said, "Happy Halloween," in a voice that made it sound like both. They went down the steps into the soft rain, and we shut the door, and I stood with the cookies in my hand and smelled the tiniest hint of peanut butter even through the plastic. Sherry came from the kitchen. Everything okay? She said. I think so, I said, and carried the cookies to the counter where the jar sat. I set them next to it, not in the trash, not on a plate. I don't know why. It felt respectful to none of the people involved and all of the people involved at the same time. As the night went on, fewer kids came and more teenagers walked in pairs and triples. Mia came home at 10 on the dot with a plastic poncho and boots that had lived a full life. She dumped a bag of her own on the table and sorted without thinking, making little piles the way kids have always made little piles, a human habit as old as pockets. Anyone want these fruity ones? She said, pushing a row of wax paper pillows toward us. Later, I said. I'm full from smells. What a weird thing to say, she said, and went to wash off a streak of eyeliner. We turned out the porch light and shut the door, and the house gathered its evening again. I stood at the counter and rested 2 fingers on the red lid and said out loud without meaning to. We did what you asked? Sherry kissed my shoulder and switched off the little lamp by the cookbooks, and the kitchen sighed itself into night. I woke up without the sound this time. No crinkle. No tap. But the feeling that had been there at 3 every night was there at 2, a soft press behind my breastbone that said get up, and I did. The house smelled like rain on old boards. In the kitchen the jar sat where it had sat for days and days of this life and years of another. The lid was closed. The circle it made in the dim light was even. I lifted the lid. On the peppermints, on the little paper map of old candy names, there was a single square of recipe card, folded once. I unfolded it and saw the neat pencil again. Good job. I laughed a small laugh that had a sound in it I don't usually make. I put the paper in the drawer with the others and held the drawer closed a second with my hand as if to keep all the small words from escaping. I went to the sink and turned the water on and then off because I was not there to do dishes. I stood there holding that feeling people hold with their arms when there's nobody to hold. The next morning the rain left town. The sky was full of that pale blue you only get after weather. The jar looked ordinary again, which is not the same as empty. I told Sherry about the note over coffee without making a story out of it. She put her hand on my wrist. I believe you, she said, and went to get her keys. I put the notes in a small envelope with no label and slid it behind the cookbooks where I could reach but not look by accident. I cleaned the counter with our cleaner and then, without thinking, wiped it again with a damp cloth until the room smelled like our house. The jar sat where it sat. I put 3 peppermints in my pocket like a person pockets talismans when he doesn't know the proper prayers. A week went by. The world stayed the world. I checked the jar at night without knowing I was checking it. Sometimes there was a wrapper that hadn't been there. Sometimes there wasn't. I didn't need it now the way I had needed it. That was what the knowing felt like. That the jar had done a thing and I had done a thing, and we both could rest if we wanted. One Sunday afternoon I drove to the cemetery with the clear, small flowers we always bought for this kind of quiet. I didn't stay long. I never do. I walked the rows and said names out loud in the way people do when they want to give shape to breath. I drove home with the eucalyptus smell in the car and the radio low, and the sky the kind of gray that doesn't promise anything and that is a promise all by itself. That night, after dishes and pajamas and a little spiral of time between the couch and the bed, I stopped in the kitchen with the lights off and stood with my palms flat on the cool counter. The house held still. Out of habit I opened the jar and looked in. There was no new note. The wrappers sat the way wrappers sit when they are done talking. I reached in and brought out a peppermint, unwrapped it, and put it on my tongue. It melted slow. The feeling that came wasn't a story. It was a room I could sit in. In bed I lay on my side listening to the small things a house is kind enough to say. A click that means cool air. A tick that means warm water. The faintest tap as the red lid settled on the jar 3 rooms away, or maybe not. I thought of a kitchen where the radio played too soft to hear words and the floor shone, and the counters dried without spots because someone wiped them with the towel hung on the oven door. I thought of a pair of good hands tapping a lid into place without hurrying. I thought of a person who warned and fed and laughed, and put things back in their boxes. If the room tilted I would sit down. If the jar crinkled, I would get up. If the world made sense at 3 in the morning for no reason at all, I would say thank you into the light over the sink and put my hand on cool glass and not ask more than that. Some nights, that was enough to sleep. Some nights, it was the reason I could. I don't know where notes come from. I don't need to. I know what to do when one says check. I know whose voice lives in the smell of pine. I know what peppermints taste like when a person who loved you once told you to take small bites, and you listened for once and let the sweetness last. On the first warm day of spring, I washed the jar in the sink with hot water and a dot of soap. The red lid had a little rust spot along the edge where your hand would never see it. I dried the glass with a soft towel and set it in the sun on the counter while I did a few other small things. The room smelled like clean water and resolve. I poured in a bag of lemon drops because spring asked for yellow. They made their happy sound. I put the lid on but not tight and smiled at myself for that old habit. I stood in the bright kitchen and did a thing a person does in a house when nobody is looking. I said, "We're okay." And the room agreed. The rain came back that night, softer now, a spring rain with less weight on it. I turned the lamp down, let the house be itself, and slept. If there was a note in the morning, I didn't need to find it right away. If there wasn't, I already had the words I needed. Sometimes, when I get up to let the cat out or put a glass in the sink, I hear the tiniest little click from the kitchen like a lid deciding where it wants to rest. I don't go check. I don't turn on the light. I stand there and listen with my hands at my sides, and I let the quiet put a peppermint on my tongue and tell me, without a voice, that the night is safe enough to walk through. I've spent half my life listening to water. Rain on the bay door at the station. Drizzle on the tin porch roof behind the bunk room. 1,000 garden hoses rolling across driveways at 2 in the morning, hissing over blacktop that still holds the heat of somebody's worst day. My name's Cal. I ride engine 3 most nights in a river town nobody vacations in. On a map it looks like a comma caught between 2 counties. Folks come through for bait and beer, then keep going. If we see their faces again, it's usually because something went wrong. The first time I smelled it on a call, I thought I was imagining it. We were toned out for smoke odor unknown source. An older woman alone in a shotgun house at the edge of the flats. No smoke showing, no glow in the windows, nothing on the thermal camera except the ghost of our own footprints as we walked. We did the dance anyway. Stove cold, outlets cool, water heater quiet, attic hatch open, noses and hands on everything that could surprise you. Her parlor was neat like a waiting room. Lace runner. Framed photos. A ceramic vase the color of robin's eggs on a low table. When I got close, the skin inside my nose prickled, like the air over a sink when someone runs hot water. Not burned dust heater smell. Not plastic. Something sweet and ugly at the same time. Penny warm. The vase's lip had slumped and frozen like a candle. A dark smear bit into the table's varnish. Electrical? Louise asked, sweeping the ceiling with the TIC. Nothing popping, I said. My voice sounded wrong in my helmet, like I was talking inside a jar. The woman stood in her doorway with both hands wrapped around a dish towel like a lifeline. It came and went, she said, like a draft with a temperature. We pulled a plug strip that had seen better decades. We told her the words we carry for nights like that. Here's our card. Here's how to call if it comes back. We're not going to leave you scared. She smiled because we were there. People do that. She kept looking at the table, though. I kept smelling heat with no fire. Back at the house, the rain started and didn't stop. It worked the dents out of the bay door and knocked the dust down off the rafters. Somebody made a pot of coffee that tasted like pennies and river mud, which is to say, hot and true. We sat around the table under the humming exhaust fan and told the kind of stories you tell when a night is stretching you thin but hasn't broken you yet. Spontaneous combustion, Rookie said, grinning at his own words. He's 22 and still thinks the world is a dare. People don't combust, Louise said, not looking up from his deck of dog-eared cards. People drink, smoke, fall asleep, and burn. That's what they do. I saw a thing in a book once, Rookie said. You see a lot of things in books you don't finish, I said. It came out sharper than I meant, so I pushed the coffee toward him like a peace offering. He laughed it off. Louise winked at me. The rain deepened until it was more like a long, slow breath than weather. I put my hand near the coffee carafe and felt a tremor pass through my fingers the way a person feels their own pulse in a cut. It wasn't the coffee. I've always run a little hot. My mother said I slept like a small furnace when I was a baby. But that night the heat came in a thin line under my skin, starting at the bridge of my nose, running down behind my eyes, slipping along my throat into my chest. It wasn't pain. It was insistence. By the time we turned in, the feeling had settled behind my sternum like a held-back cough. I woke at 3 with my shirt sticking to me and the taste of iron in my mouth. I sat up on the bunk, feet on concrete, breathing slow so I didn't wake anyone. The rain had softened to a steady tap, tap, tap on the gutter outside the bay. In the dark the station had that hollow sound old buildings get, like they're remembering themselves. The itch in my nose made me want to rub it with the heel of my hand like a kid. When I did, the inside of my sinuses stung. I walked to the sink and let cold water run over my wrists. I didn't look at my face in the little mirror because sometimes at 3 in the morning your own eyes say the wrong thing. We got 2 more odor calls before sunrise. One was a basement where a glass candy dish had puddled into a clear oval. One was a bedroom where the ceiling fan drooped slightly, the way plastic does when you leave it too close to the stove. No visible flames. No soot. Just the smell, the penny-warm sweetness that shouldn't live in air. Arson? Rookie said in the rig, hopeful for drama. Arsonists like attention, Louise said. This is like the opposite. This is like a stove that got embarrassed. Rookie said, then laughed at his own joke and shut up when neither of us did. I told myself what we all tell ourselves. Houses are weird. Heat goes where it wants. Glass melts at lower temperatures than people think. Sometimes a candle left in a window does a magic trick and nobody knows until morning. But the feeling in my chest had its own opinion. It swelled when I smelled the rooms. It eased when we stepped back into the rain. When I got off shift, I drove the long way home even though home was just a small house with a roof that needs replacing and a porch that sags like it's tired of holding the world up. I took the river road. The water was high and brown and fast, chewing the pilings near the old mill. I rolled down the window and put my hand out to let the cool blow over my wrist bones. The heat under my skin pulled toward it, like a magnet toward a nail. I thought about going to my mother's house to fix the gutter she's been asking about for a month, but I turned into her street without deciding to and parked under the one elm that's left. She wasn't home. The house felt different without her in it, like a church between services. On top of the fridge my old high school baseball cap sat where it has for years because she says it makes the kitchen friendlier. I turned on the kettle because the house expects tea when the rain sounds like this. In the back bedroom there's a cedar chest Nana June left us. Inside is a quilt that smells like hope, a stack of photos that smell like film, and a shoebox that smells like the inside of a drawer in a house nobody has lived in for 20 years. I don't open the box much. The last time was after my father's funeral, when the weight of being the last man in a line hit me like a sack of wet clothes. That day I opened it, and found a folded paper where a letter should be and put it back because I wasn't ready. This time I took the box to the kitchen table and opened it with the slow care you give to things that don't belong to you even though they do. Inside were 5 things: a tarnished spoon with a braided handle, a coin with a cross that had been rubbed to a simple plus sign, a half-burned church candle wrapped in wax paper, a dried sprig of rosemary tied with thread, and the folded paper. The thread was green. The paper was a recipe card, the kind with lines and a place for the title. On the title line, in my grandmother's hand, it said for the 13th. Under that, in small neat letters, river water, a pinch of salt, iron breath. Count 13. Wait for rain. Don't look. I stood over the table with my hands hanging at my sides like I'd forgotten what they were for. Outside the rain lifted in a way that makes the world seem like it's taking a breath between sentences. The kettle clicked off. I didn't pour the water. I took a jar from the cabinet, the old kind with the wire bail and the chipped glass lid, and set it next to the folded cart like I was setting two old friends side by side. When the rain started again, I took the jar to the back steps. The yard tilted toward the alley. The water always ran that way along the fence and into the old culvert, which mouths into the creek, which feeds the river that feeds whatever is hungry beyond. I held the jar out and let the rain patter in. My hand shook, but not the way a person shakes when they're scared. It was a finer tremor, like the starting line of a sneeze the body won't give you. When the jar was half full, I took it inside. I found the box of salt in the pantry and poured some into my palm. I took a pinch. I looked around for iron and laughed at myself because the whole house is nails, but I wanted a little thing, not a wall. The braided spoon in the box was iron. I tapped it over the jar so a tiny flake fell in. It felt foolish and serious at the same time, which is how most real things feel when you first do them. For breath, I didn't know. The card didn't say blow or breathe in. I set the jar on the counter, leaned down, and breathed into it once, steady and warm, the way you breathe across the top of a bottle to make a note. The water barely moved. I put the lid on, set the jar by the sink, and counted to 13 because not doing it would have been the same as saying I didn't believe in anything at all. By the time my mother came home with a bag of groceries and a wet umbrella, the jar looked like an ordinary jar of water. I put it in the back of the fridge next to the jar of pickled okra and a bottle of ketchup older than Mia's learner's permit. We had tea. We talked about the price of eggs. When she smiled at me, her eyes went soft at the corners the way they always have, like there's a light in there that knows a few more things than it tells. "Did you sleep at the station?" she asked. "A little," I said. "It was quiet and not quiet." "You look warm," she said, laying the back of her fingers under my jaw the way mothers do to check on fevers and feelings. "Take care." On the way out, I took the jar out of the fridge, wrapped it in a towel, and put it in the cooler I keep behind the passenger seat. The heat eased as I drove. By the time I got home, the itch in my nose had settled to a memory. There were 4 more out calls in the next 11 days. Melted glass. Sootless heat. Smears and varnish. One burn pattern on a bedspread that looked like the outline of a person had exhaled all at once. The calls came on small streets and bigger ones, in a duplex, in an apartment over a barber shop, and in a trailer where the owner had left for a smoke and came back to a countertop that looked like a son had leaned on it. The folks all told the same story with different hands. It came and went. It felt like a draft with a temperature. It smelled like pennies and sugar. The night of the 12th, the sky pressed low, and the air went quiet in that way it goes quiet before a certain kind of rain. Luis and I were checking the saws because the little fuel lines we ordered are thinner than they look online, and the new gasket tears if you look at it wrong. Rookie was wiping down the rig like a Labrador, happy to be included. "You superstitious?" Luis asked without looking up. "About what?" "About calendars." I shrugged. "We've had busy Fridays that weren't the 13th and quiet ones that were." "I asked if you were superstitious," he said. "I'm practical," I said, which is the kind of answer a superstitious person gives when they want to pretend they aren't. He set the saw down and leaned his elbows on his knees and stared at the concrete like it was a river he could see something in. "My abuela used to put a saucer of water by the door when it rained on the 13th, he said. "Said it keeps the house from heating the wrong way." "That a thing?" "It doesn't hurt," he said, and stood up and went to look busy somewhere else. I went to the sink and filled a paper cup and set it by the door to the bay because sometimes the simplest version of a thing is the truest one. At 1:08 in the morning the tone dropped for a medical unknown problem, breathing difficulty, trailer park out past the scrapyard. "Dispatch," said neighbor reported. "Wheezing like a kettle." We rolled. The rain came with us, soft and steady. In front of lot 14 a man in a bathrobe stood ankle-deep in water with a flashlight so we could make things darker. "In there," he said, pointing. I knocked but he didn't answer. Inside, the air was thick. Not smoky. Heavy, like a closet in summer. The smell hit me in the middle of my face. The heat under my skin flared like someone turned a knob. In the back room, a man sat on the edge of the bed with both hands on his knees, breathing with his mouth open like his ribcage was a door somebody had wedged shut. He looked up at me with eyes that were too wet. "Hey," I said, kneeling so I didn't look like a wall. "I'm Cal. We're gonna help you out." "Hot," he said without a voice. He was my age, maybe younger. He had that look people get when they're trying not to scare you with how scared they are. Luis put the pulse ox on his finger. It beeped like a patient bird. 92, he said, and Rookie repeated it into the radio with hands that shook. The man's skin didn't feel like fever when I touched his wrist. It felt like a heater that isn't on but remembers how. The smell got sweet. Not cloying. Barely there. I looked at the ceiling. A circle of paint above the bed had sagged like a cake. The little glass shade over the lamp had begun to lean. The man's breath hitched hard. His shoulders rose. His eyes went wide. "Did you ask?" he said, the words all air and no sound. "Asked who?" I said. He swallowed. The tendons in his neck stood out like wires. "The rain," he said, and his eyes slid past my face and locked onto something over my shoulder. I knew better than to look where scared people look. There's never anything there you can carry out to the rig. I kept my eyes on him. "Okay," I said, because okay is a thing you give people when you have nothing else handy. "We're gonna help you breathe." We moved him to the floor where there was room to work. Louise set up the neb. Rookie started a line. The man's chest stuttered. His hands trembled against the laminate. The heat in the room pressed at my skin. The itch in my nose made my eyes water. Somewhere near my right ear, where my radio sits, the static that usually sounds like rain for people who don't like silence grew a shade heavier, and in it, not through it, a word came, not with a voice but with shape. Count. I know the feeling of my own thoughts. They sound like my voice and wear my boots. This didn't. It slid in like a river you didn't notice while you were walking along the bank. Not loud. Not wrong. It had the weight of instructions given by someone who knows how to do the thing you're doing and would rather not watch you do it badly. I kept my hands moving while my mouth counted in the back of my teeth. 1, 2, 3. I kept my eyes on the man's face because the recipe card had said don't look and I didn't need to know at what. At 13 the heat under my sternum popped like a bubble, not outward, inward, into something like relief just 2 inches behind my breastbone. The man's breath hiccuped and went all the way down for the first time since we walked in. The little glass shade on the lamp stopped leaning. The sag in the paint steadied like a balloon finding its own shape. The smell thinned until the only thing left was rain on cheap carpet and the sharp plastic of new oxygen tubing. We got him onto a cot. In the doorway he caught my sleeve with 2 fingers. "Don't look," he whispered, and gave a small laugh that sounded like someone else's laugh coming through his own throat. "It gets jealous." In the rig he fell asleep with his mouth open, the way little kids do when the weather changes and your whole body wants to listen. At the ER they took him without a lot of questions because that's what happens when you roll up with a story your face doesn't know how to tell yet. In the parking lot I stood under the hospital's overhang and let the rain tap my scalp like a hand. The heat in my chest stayed gone. In its place something else hummed, low and steady, like the station's exhaust fan after midnight. On the way back I told them I wanted to swing by my house, and nobody asked why because everyone knew even if they didn't. I went in, pulled the jar from behind the seat, still in the towel, and set it on my kitchen counter. The recipe card was on the table where I'd left it, a little warping at the edges from the day I set my coffee on it by accident. I turned the card over. On the back, where a person writes a note to themselves when they don't want to put real words into the world yet, there were 3 lines, not in Nana's hand, not in anyone's hand I knew. The pencil had pressed too hard in places, too soft in others, like a person writing while riding in a car. Share water. Don't bargain. Rain keeps the heat honest. I put the card in the drawer with the bottle opener and the batteries and stood there with the drawer open and the rain wanting in through the kitchen window and understood 2 things at once. First, that some nights were going to try to teach me the wrong lesson. Second, that it was on me what lesson I took. We had 3 calls the rest of that night. A blood sugar. A smell of gas that turned out to be a skunk under a porch. A grandma who thought her heart was racing and was right, which is rare, and we rode to the hospital with the lights low and my hand on her shoulder because sometimes that keeps the world in its lane better than sirens do. When I got off shift I drove to the river in daylight and stood on the concrete apron where kids jump in July. The water rolled by as if it had places to be that didn't involve me, which I respect. I set the jar on the edge and took the lid off. The water in the jar didn't look any different from the water in the river. I said thank you out loud anyway, because saying thank you out loud is a way of spending a little piece of yourself on purpose. Back at the house I filled the jar again in my sink, a handful of salt, a tap of the spoon, a breath that fogged the glass for a second, and the lid turned just a snug, not tight. Into the back of the fridge it went, next to the okra and the ketchup, ordinary as a leftover soup. In the days after, the odd calls slowed. That happens. Sometimes weird things clump and sometimes they scatter. I didn't kid myself. It wasn't because I counted in a trailer. It wasn't because my grandmother wrote a grocery list for weather. But it also didn't feel unrelated, the way a cloud you can't see can still shade you. A week later I went to see Doc Sue, who runs the county medical examiner's office with a coffee mug and a patience I envy. He's one of those men who never looks surprised to see you, which makes you want to surprise him with something good. I brought him donuts because if you want information from a person whose job is to look for small facts in quiet rooms, you should bring something sweet and not ask for anything until the second cup. You doing your throat-clearing thing, he said, smiling behind his glasses. What do you want to ask me you don't have words for yet? You ever see rooms that got hot without burning? I asked. He leaned back. The chair squeaked like it always does. He stared at the ceiling as if there are notes written up there we can't see. Sometimes, he said. Usually there's a heater that confesses if you look long enough. Sometimes there isn't. Sometimes I write unknown and go home and wash my hands a little longer than usual. Why? I told him about the vase and the candy dish and the ceiling paint and the way heat sometimes lives in air like a guest. I didn't tell him about the counting because some things feel smaller when you take them apart and name them. He listened the way a person listens when they have known you through your worst and still let you borrow their tools. Old houses, he said when I was done. Old wiring. New plastics. Weather. People who are tired using the wrong words for the right feelings. He sipped his coffee and set it down. Also, there are days when an answer isn't a thing. It's a habit. You superstitious? I asked. I'm practical, he said deadpan, and we both laughed, soft and a little tired. He led me to a bookshelf in the back and pulled out a binder so thick it should have had a spine of its own. Inside were clippings, newspaper stories, typed notes, a few Polaroids so faded they looked like snow. He flipped through and let the pages whisper. Every 10, 12 years we get a run of these, he said. I used to put pushpins in a map when it happened. My old boss told me to stop because it made people nervous. But the thing is, sometimes cluster days are just clustered days. He shrugged. Sometimes not. On my way out he handed me a photocopy. My wife's grandmother, he said. She kept this by the sink. It was a list, in Vietnamese on the left and English on the right, the English written by someone who learned it late and liked it anyway. On the 13th with rain. Water in a dish by the door. Keep iron on the stove. Count the breaths of the quiet. If a voice speaks, don't ask its name. I taped the paper inside our pantry door next to the grocery list and the one old photo booth strip where Sherry and I look like we're trying not to laugh so hard we blur. When I opened the pantry for cereal in the morning, the paper would look at me with its steady lines and I'd feel steadier back. A month later another Friday the 13th came around because calendars are shameless. It had been dry all week. The sky that day was blue as a new bicycle. Towards sunset, though, a bank of cloud shouldered over the river and the first sprinkles hit the windshield like a memory. I was off. I stood in my kitchen with the back door cracked so the air could move through in the right direction. The jar sat on the counter, condensation on the outside like breath. I didn't feel the itch in my nose yet. The heat under my sternum was a soft coin instead of a knife. I set a saucer of tap water by the door because it doesn't hurt. I set the spoon on the stove because it felt like respect. When the rain got serious, the house leaned into it like an old friend at a table. The sound came through the gutters and the downspout, and the little places where boards touch in ways no builder designed. I rested my palm on the counter, and could feel the smallest vibration like the house itself was counting. At 3:03, I felt the first line of heat slip up the bridge of my nose. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder, like the way your muscles tell you in the first step that today they remember every staircase you've ever climbed. I unsnapped the jar and breathed across the open mouth of it, slow. The water didn't care about my breath. It never does. But the axe steadied my hands. Without taking my eyes off the lamplight on the jar's rim, I counted to 13 in my back teeth, the way a person prays when they were never taught the words. Around 8, something in the room sighed. Around 10, the heat behind my breastbones slid back 2 inches and settled. At 13, a whisper of cool brushed across my cheek like a person walking past you in a movie theater aisle, careful not to step on your feet. I didn't look. I didn't ask a name. I said thank you, and the word felt like water rolling off the edge of a spoon, small and right. Now, if you asked me on a day with blue sky and dry boards whether I believe in curses and voices and jars, I'll probably say I believe in training and smoke alarms and making sure your batteries haven't been in the drawer since the Clinton administration. If you asked me on a night when rain threads itself through the town like a gentle needle and the phone rings for a house that smells too sweet, I'll tell you that some knowledge doesn't wear a uniform. It lives in drawers and recipes and the way our grandparents put water by the door without telling us why. Every 13th with rain I set the saucer down and loosen the lid on the jar and remind myself to count. Sometimes the radio spits static that feels like an eyelash on my cheek. Sometimes nothing happens at all and we eat chili and wash the bowls and let the house hum while we fall asleep on the couch. That's not nothing. That's the point. Rookie has stopped making jokes about books he hasn't finished. He sets a paper cup of water by the bay door without being asked. Luis gives me a look when the weather turns where he doesn't smile and I don't either, and that's our prayer. Doc Sue keeps a copy of his wife's grandmother's list in the drawer where he keeps the good pens. My mother keeps her tea kettle full and the back steps swept. Sherry stands in the kitchen doorway sometimes at 3 in the morning and watches me breathe, and when I open my eyes she says, "We're okay." And we are. When I drive the river road on my way home after a bad night, I roll the window down even if it's cold, and put my hand out to let the air wash the last of the heat from my skin. The water is always moving towards something bigger than us. That's its habit. Mine is to listen to it, and count when it asks. A few weeks ago I went back to the older woman's shotgun house at the edge of the flats, off-duty, no rig. Just me and a paper sack with peaches because she had a bowl on her table that wanted peaches in it. She invited me in like she'd been expecting company all day. The low table in the parlor has a new runner. The old varnish smear is still there under the polish, a dark tongue no one else would notice. "You still getting that smell sometimes?" I asked. "Only when it rains," she said. "But I put water by the door now. My mother used to. I forgot. But it came back to me." She poured me tea that tasted like a clean kitchen. We sat and listened to the tick of the old clock, the one that sounds like a person thinking about cutting a slice of cake and deciding against it. When I stood to go, she touched my sleeve. "Whatever you did that night," she said. "Thank you." "I counted," I said, and felt foolish and not foolish at all. In the truck I held the steering wheel and let my shoulders drop. The jar sat behind the seat, ordinary and quiet, a thing made of plain glass and a habit made of rain. I don't know where the heat comes from. Houses. Weather. People who carry their worst days under their ribs because there's nowhere else to put them. I don't know where the voice lives when it isn't breathing through static and old paper. I know this. I've learned how to keep from making a bargain when I'm scared. I've learned to share water. I've learned not to look for faces in a room that needs you to keep your eyes on the living. The last thing my father told me before his breath went thin was, "Do it steady." He was talking about the way I sanded a porch board, but I hear him at 3 in the morning when my nose starts to itch and the house leans into the rain. Do it steady. Count. Don't look. Wait for the room to let go of its heat the honest way. Sometimes you get answers. Sometimes you get habits. The answers make better stories. The habits keep you alive. So I listen to water. I count to 13. I keep a jar in the fridge behind the okra and the ketchup. When the world wants to burn the wrong way, I remind it how to cool. And when I hear that small click from the kitchen, the sound of a lid deciding where it wants to rest, I don't go in. I don't turn on the light. I say thank you to a room that smells like rain, and let the night pass through the house like a river, heading wherever rivers go when they've done what they came to do. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. The rain had already been falling for hours when my night shift began, the kind of steady, even rain that turns a town's lights soft and keeps the streets empty. Our hospice sits on a low hill behind a row of cedars, a modest building with a wraparound awning that makes the downpour sound like 1,000 quiet hands drumming. On nights like that, the corridors almost hum. The nurses speak in low voices. The machines breathe and tick. You can feel time move a little slower, like it respects the weather. I am a hospice physician. My work is small and close, more about comfort than cures. I measure pain on faces. I listen to old stories as morphine runs slow and sure. I stand at windows when it rains and watch the parking lot glow like a shallow lake. I used to joke that my job made me the steward of endings, but I don't say that anymore. Endings can be gentle or they can be complicated, and lately, they'd begun to feel complicated. A few weeks before the rain, a new patient arrived after sunset. His name on the chart was Thomas Laird, age 51, brought from a community hospital 2 towns over. They said he was terminal but stable. The transfer note used words like encephalitic process, unknown etiology, and refractory seizure activity. The ambulance crew rolled him into room 7, and I met them by the door with a pen in my pocket and my palms still wet from the sanitizer. Mr. Laird was taller than I'd expected, with thick wrists and the kind of shoulders that suggested a life lived outdoors. His hair had gone gray at the temples, but his face was younger than the chart said. He was asleep when I leaned in, the good, heavy sleep of someone dosed for comfort. His mouth was slightly open. His breathing was regular. The only odd thing, at first glance, was the way his eyes moved beneath his lids. It wasn't typical REM drift. It was faster, and not random. It was as if his eyes were scanning, left right, left right, left right, in a rhythm too fine to be called a twitch but too mechanical to be dreaming. I stood there longer than usual, counting, listening to the monitors, trying to decide if it was a trick of the light or a sign of something I'd only read about. I had seen nystagmus in the emergency department years ago, a dizzy patient's eyes jumping like a skipping record, but this felt different. It looked, and I know this isn't a medical word, purposeful, like his eyes were trying to follow something I couldn't see. The nurse that night, Diane, watched me watch him. "He does that," she said, her voice calm, her hand on the bedrail the way experienced nurses lean. "Every so often, the eyes go like that. Then the head starts, then the shoulders. Sometimes it stops there. Sometimes he stiffens up and we ride it out." "What did the hospital say?" I asked. "Any name for it?" She looked at me with a patient smile. "You know how it is when they don't know. Metabolic. Viral. Autoimmune." They wrote all 3 and circled none. We adjusted his pillow and checked his foresight. I wrote an order for a small dose of lorazepam if the movements worsened. We dimmed the lights. In the hallway, the rain had found a tempo, soft on the awning, harder on the roof. It felt like the whole building was breathing in time with the weather. Mr. Laird's chart said he had a niece, emergency contact, listed as L. Monroe. She came the next morning wearing a green jacket beaded with rain. She was in her early 30s, with a quiet face and steady eyes. She told me she was more like a daughter to him than a niece, that he taught her to back a trailer straight, that he loved fishing small lakes at dawn. She spoke in the simple way family members do when they are tired and past the point of asking what cannot be answered. "What happened?" I asked, inviting whatever she could give me. "He got sick," she said. "He got tired." He said the light hurt his eyes. He would jump at sounds like they slapped him. Then he had an episode. He said it felt like the room tilted. His eyes. I don't know how to describe it. Like buzzing. Any travel? Any animal bites? Caves? Old barns? She shook her head. Just work. And he hasn't hunted in years. He said he wanted quiet. He lived quiet. We keep things unstirred in hospice. No fever of questions, no laboratory fanfare. But I drew a few basic labs with her permission. It was mostly for my own mapmaking. We changed his bedding, taped the floor more comfortably, and turned the blinds so the room kept the gray of the day but none of the glare. The rain made a soft hush that helped everything. Over the next week, his pattern revealed itself. Every day, once or twice, his eyes would begin their fine left-right sweep. The movement would spread to his facial muscles, eyelids fluttering, cheeks tightening, and if it stopped there, he would settle and the monitors would show the same easy waves. If it didn't stop, his head would begin a tiny, precise shake, a no-no-no gesture small as a shiver. Sometimes his shoulders would join, a low roll like he was trying to shrug off an invisible weight. A handful of times, his whole body stiffened and shook in the way everyone recognizes from medical shows, the sudden storm of a grand mal. We medicated him gently, enough to keep the hills low without flattening the valleys. It was during one of the lighter spells that he spoke to me for the first time. His eyes had been closed and then opened, clear as a winter pond, and he looked directly at me. The pupils were steady for a heartbeat, and then the scanning started, so small I might have doubted it if I hadn't already learned the rhythm. He took a breath as if surfacing and said, in a voice made of sand and sleep, "Please keep it quiet." "Of course," I said, leaning closer so I wouldn't have to raise my volume. "It's quiet." He held me with that careful gaze and said, "Not out there. Here." He seemed to be listening to something in the space between us, some thread I wasn't hearing. Then the eyelids fluttered, the cheeks tightened, the head gave its tiny no, and the window of clarity closed. But the sentence stayed with me in the way sentences do when they land on a place you didn't know was tender. 2 days later, the rain let up and then began again, slower, and something shifted. When I came in from the parking lot, the night air smelled like wet cedar, and there was a black SUV parked under the awning. 2 men in suits I didn't recognize were inside, their heads bent over their phones. They had the easy stillness of people who expect to be obeyed. I nodded to them the way you nod to strangers in a hospital, and one of them nodded back without smiling. I found the charge nurse at the desk with a yellow folder in her hands. "Visitors?" I asked. "Some kind of public health liaison," she said. 2 men, 1 woman. They said they were here to review infection control. They're in with administration. They wanted to know about Mr. Laird's room. We are not a place of outbreaks. We are a place of late chapters, of quilts brought from home, of televisions turned to nature shows so the rooms can be full of rivers and bees. We wash our hands. We wear gloves when we should. We keep it simple and clean. The timing of their visit made something in me go alert, but I smoothed my face and said I'd be in room 7 if anyone needed me. Inside, it was dim and easy. Mr. Laird slept. The blinds were angled to keep the light friendly. The rain ticked on the awning and made the lamplight feel warmer. I checked the chart, and then I set the chart down, and I just sat. Sometimes that's the best medicine here, being present in a chair, letting the room remember it's a room, not a machine. When I opened my office door an hour later, the green light on my little motion camera was blinking. I keep that camera on a high shelf pointing at my desk, mostly to make sure that when I forget where I leave things the camera can accuse me fairly. The blinking means activity had been recorded. I don't set it for the daytime. I don't talk to it. It is not a paranoid device. But something about the black SUV and the steady suits made me touch the top of the camera as if to feel its temperature. As I was deciding whether to review the footage, a man stepped into my doorway. He had a raincoat draped over his arm and a smile arranged on his face in the way people do when they want to look unthreatening. He wasn't one of the men from the SUV. He was taller, and his hair was that careful shade of gray that some men achieve by luck and others by bottle. He extended a hand like we were at a fundraiser. "Doctor," he said in a voice that managed to be warm and rough at the same time. "I'm Rowan West. I coordinate regional responses for a federal office you've never heard of. May I have a moment of your time?" There are sentences that tug at your nervous system like a bell rope. That was one of them. I didn't take his hand, not out of rudeness, but because my palms were damp and because shaking hands in a hospice is a habit I've mostly worked out of myself. I motioned to the chair. He sat. His raincoat sighed. "We try to be good guests," he said, glancing at the stacks of journals, the coffee mug with a chip on the rim, the little fake plant I keep because real plants don't do well under fluorescent lights. "We try not to be loud or dramatic or anything that would make the words panic or outbreak find their way into a conversation. We were told you're a quiet man who prefers things simple. That's useful for us." "I'm a doctor," I said. "Simple is useful for everyone." He smiled again, and it looked more real the second time. "There's a patient here who came from Harper Community. Mr. Laird. I'm going to ask you to minimize your notes on him for now. See to his comfort, of course. We appreciate the work you're doing. But you don't need to write what you think you're seeing. I write what I observe," I said. "Observations are a kind of thinking," he said. "Think less on paper, more in your head." He set a thin folder on my desk without opening it. It was unmarked, which was the most marked thing about it. "We'll handle the rest. We have a team who can take custody of his body when the time comes. We'll do it respectfully. We'll clean the room. You won't have to trouble yourself with any of that." "Why would I not document my patient?" I asked. "If there is a reason, tell me the reason plainly. You're standing in a place where plain is appreciated." He looked at me with a kind of candidness I wasn't expecting, as if he'd been told I would like that. "Because names are sticky," he said. "And when a doctor writes something into a chart, it becomes a kind of name, even if it's just a description. Names make phones ring in buildings where phones shouldn't ring. We'd like the phones not to ring for a while." "Is he contagious?" I asked. "Do I need to protect my staff differently than we already do?" "Protect them as you would. Nothing airborne. No need for theatrics." He stood as if the conversation were as finished as he had planned it to be. "We know you'll do the right thing." He retrieved the folder and offered me his hand again. I didn't take it, and for the first time his expression slipped a little, like I had stepped outside the version of our interaction he had rehearsed. "It's raining," he said, reassembling his smile. "Good weather for quiet." After he left, I watched the motion camera footage. It was a short clip, my office empty, then the door opening, and two men in scrub jackets stepping in. They didn't look like nurses I knew. One wore a baseball cap. The other wore a badge on a lanyard that didn't belong to this building. They moved professionally, almost politely, pulling two binders from my shelf and a box of labeled swabs from the cabinet. They set everything back in place as if they respected the idea of a tidy desk. They left. The clip ended. The timestamp was that morning, before I arrived. The next days softened again and then tightened, the way days do when rain keeps choosing to stop and then start. Mr. Laird had a stretch of good hours. He opened his eyes and recognized his niece. He smiled in a way that made you understand how people had once leaned on him in small crises. He spoke a few words and made a joke so gentle the room sighed with relief. Then the scanning returned, and the small no-no of his head, and we gave him medication and he slept. Diane said she had started to time the spells by the sound of the rain, and I confessed that I had too, though my timings were different than hers, as if the room and the hallway kept separate clocks. I washed my hands more than usual. I got used to the weight of gloves even when I might not have needed them. I wore a face shield for procedures that didn't require one. It felt theatrical, so I moved slower and smiled more and said softer things to make the theater feel like weather instead of fear. No one gave me a hard time. In hospice, people let you have your rituals. On the third night after Rowan West's visit, my phone rang in my pocket while I was charting. The number was blocked. The voice that came through wasn't quite right, like there was a machine between me and the person speaking, rounding off the edges and pouring syrup over them. "Doctor," the voice said, "you're doing well. Take care not to publish anything. Not a blog post. Not a case report. Not a photograph on a private account. You will be embarrassed if you do, and then you will be unwell." "Who is this?" I asked, but I knew the answer was him, or someone carrying his voice for him. "Rowan or someone like him," the voice said. "We have a way we want this to go." "How do you want it to go?" I said. "Quietly," the voice said, and then the call ended with a soft click that felt, somehow, old-fashioned. After that I slept less deeply. I listened more. I started paying attention to my own eyes. It wasn't hypochondria, not exactly. It was a kindness to myself to be certain that what I was feeling was normal anxiety, and not the beginning of the scanning that had come to mean his illness to me. Once or twice, late, when the building was down to its lowest lights and the rain was the only conversation, I felt my eyes flick and settle in a way that made me stop writing and sit still. It could have been nothing. It likely was nothing. But the body is not a thing you can boss with certainty. What I will say plainly, because I promised myself to be plain even if I wasn't allowed to be public, is that Mr. Laird's illness behaved like a guest who didn't want to leave. It didn't rage. It didn't shout. It asked for small concessions and then made itself at home. It hated bright light and sudden sounds. It made his eyes so busy they tired themselves. It sent small tremors down the line from his face to his shoulders. It made him whisper, "Please keep it quiet," and made us feel, somehow, like we were conspiring against something bigger than a disease when we honored him. He declined the way people do here, a little each day, like a tide working on a shoreline. One morning his niece came in and read to him from a paperback he loved. The next afternoon she sat in silence and held his hand. On the 5th day of rain, his blood pressure stayed lower than it liked to be, and his pulse stopped caring how good the monitors looked. He had an episode in the late evening that we slowed with medication, the kind that gives the body permission to choose comfort over struggle. We dimmed the light further. We smoothed the blanket. We let the rain do half the talking. He died just after midnight, the way many people do when the hour turns and the building takes its smallest breath. His niece was sleeping in the chair. She'd asked for a blanket, and Karen had brought the extra soft one from the linen closet we saved for families. I listened to his last breaths and then to the silence after. There is an honest quiet in that moment that I am grateful to have been allowed to witness so many times. You can call it a threshold if you like. I think of it as a smoothing out. I had my hand on the call button to summon Diane when the hall filled with boots. 4 people in gray coveralls and clear hoods moved into room 7 with a speed that didn't knock anything over. Behind them was Rowan West in a lighter suit, no hood, an earpiece curling along his cheek as if he'd been born with it. He put a hand up gently, like a conductor asking strings to soften. For a second, I thought he was going to offer genuine condolences, but the moment passed. "We'll take it from here," he said. "Thank you for your care. Please step out." "This is hospice," I said. "I stay." "You've done your part," he said. "Let us do the rest." I looked at his team. I looked at Mr. Laird. I thought about the promise implicit in our admitting papers and our soft blankets. But I also thought about the niece asleep in the chair, and how waking her to a room with masked figures and brisk gestures would be a violence I could prevent. I stepped out. Rowan took my place. They worked efficiently. They covered, cleaned, sealed. Their motions were careful but not panicked. They reminded me of gardeners who knew the weight of their tools, not soldiers rehearsing fear. The niece woke gently when Diane touched her shoulder and led her to our family room down the hall, where there is a lamp that makes everything gold. I stood by the window at the far end of the corridor and listened to the rain. Rowan reappeared beside me as if he'd been there all along. "You did well," he said. "You kept your notes minimal. You kept your staff steady. That is not small." "What is it?" I asked. "What do you call it when you talk about it in rooms where phones do ring?" He shook his head once, lightly. "Names stick. I told you." "Is it new?" I asked. "Or did we just not notice it in time the last few times it visited?" He looked at the parking lot lights and seemed to consider telling the truth. "Some things prefer quiet," he said. "If you leave them alone, they leave you alone. If you press them, they make noise. We prefer less noise." "That isn't an answer," I said, but I said it softly, because I didn't want to make any noise either. He put a card on the windowsill where my hand had been, as if that made the exchange cleaner. The card was blank except for a number. "Call me if you think you've been careless," he said. "I don't think you have been. But call anyway if you need to." After they left, the building felt lighter and sadder. The room smelled like bleach and rain. We changed the sheets. We replaced the trash liners. We brought the niece back and gave her as much time as she needed to say goodbye to the room rather than to the person, which is sometimes the only version available. She hugged each of us, which isn't required but is appreciated. She left with a small bag of his things and a prayer card from a drawer we keep stocked for anyone who wants words when their own won't come. I went home when the sky was lighter than it had been all week. I washed my hands longer than necessary and still felt a phantom slickness like hospital soap. I slept for an hour and then woke to the sound of the same rain, soft as breath. The days that followed were normal in the way normal can look like denial. We admitted a woman with end-stage heart failure. We celebrated a 90-year-old's last birthday with vanilla cupcakes and a candle we didn't light because oxygen was running. It was good work, and the building felt honest again. At home, alone, I replayed the quiet moments with Mr. Laird. His eyes scanning, the small no, the whisper keep it quiet. I watched the motion camera clips more than once and then felt foolish for doing so. I wrote notes in a notebook I keep in a drawer, not on any server. I thought about sending an email to a colleague who runs a small infectious disease clinic an hour away, a man I trust who trusts me. Each time I drafted a message in my head, I heard Rowan's voice flattening the syllables. "You will be embarrassed, and then you will be unwell." I didn't mind the idea of being embarrassed. The other part I minded. The only other thing I will say, and I say it without drama, is that once or twice in those next days, when a car door slammed loudly in the street or a plate clinked sharply in the sink, my eyes flicked left-right, in a way that felt like reflex-seeking. I sat still and let it pass. It always did. I kept the lights softer than usual. I kept the radio low. If anyone asked, I told them I was enjoying the quiet that the rain gives a person if they let it. You want details, I know. That's how our minds think they make sense of things. Where did he work? Who else was sick? What did the lab show that I didn't write? What was in the thin folder that Rowan wouldn't let me see? I held his card once, and then put it back in the drawer. I considered calling, and then didn't. Not every question is a door that wants opening. We tell ourselves that doors want opening because we are story-making animals in a place where stories end. I have learned to leave some doors shut so that the room can remain a room. One night, 2 weeks after, I took a longer walk through the building than I needed to. The rain had lightened to mist. The hallways looked like they were underwater, the way fluorescent lights do when the air is damp. In room 7, the bed was empty and made, the way we keep it when we're waiting to welcome someone new. I stood in the doorway and listened to nothing. Then I heard something, very small, that I decided was only the ice machine creaking 2 corridors away. I smiled at myself and shook my head. No, I thought, like the tiniest joke you tell no one. There is an idea I keep returning to when the building is quiet and the rain is reliable. Some illnesses prefer to stay unnamed. They live in the gray places, the margins of charts, the guarded conversations, the notes that don't get typed. They do their work gently, in small increments, asking the body to be a little more careful with light and noise, and then a little more, until the person is tired enough to sleep and keeps sleeping. If you go searching for them with sirens and headlines, they become something else. They ask for attention in ways that scare everyone and make the wrong people feel important. But if you keep the room dim and the voices low and the blankets soft, they move through like weather. That doesn't make them kind. It just makes them old. If you want instruction, I can offer only the most ordinary kind. Wash your hands like you mean it. Be generous with quiet. Keep the lights softer than you think you need to. Hold the person's hand when they ask, and hold it still when they don't. If names help you feel strong, whisper them to yourself and then put them away when you walk into the room. Listen to the rain. It can do more work than you'd expect. I have not sent this to anyone who would assign it a number or a category. I am writing it here for you, in the same voice I use in room corners and family chairs and at the edge of the bed when the monitors decide to be polite. If there is a man like Rowan reading over my shoulder, I hope he hears that I have no appetite for noise, that I am honoring his preference for quiet while honoring my own for truth. If there is anything inside me that wants to argue, it can wait until morning. I remember Mr. Laird saying, "Please keep it quiet." I hear that sentence in the rain now, like the drop pattern is arranging it on the awning. He wanted low light and slow voices. He wanted the permission that morphine gives the body to choose comfort. He wanted to be left alone and not left alone at the same time. That is not a complicated wish. That is the wish of most people when the hour turns and the building takes its smallest breath. The town is sleeping as I finish this, and the rain is still steady enough to make the streetlights look like candles set in bowls. I will wash my hands again before I go to bed, not because I am afraid but because it helps. I will lie down and listen and let the sound make the walls feel close and kind. If my eyes decide to flick once or twice before I drift, I will let them. The body asks small things and then larger things. We can say yes or no to each without making it a war. If you're reading this with your own lights low and a sound like rain in the background, I hope you feel the room get quieter as the words settle. We will all be stewards of endings for someone, someday. The best we can do is make the endings gentle. Keep your distance when you should. Say your prayers if you keep them. Be kind with light and sound. Some things prefer quiet. Let them have it, and they might let you have yours. The rain had been steady all afternoon, the kind that softens edges and turns every light in town into a small, patient halo. By evening the gutters were murmuring and the awnings along Main Street dripped in a slow rhythm that sounded like a clock you could hear but never see. I parked along the square and sat for a moment with the engine off, watching my breath fog the windshield and blur the courthouse dome. It felt like the town I grew up in was breathing with me. Different storefronts, same brick. New faces, same cadence. Maple Hollow didn't change so much as it drifted, and the rain always brought it back to the shape I remembered. I hadn't come back for much. The last of my father's papers had finally made their way to a lawyer who wanted me to sign something and initial something else, and I was the only person left to do those small, tidy things. I told myself that was the reason I drove the old Tulane in, but the calendar knew better. October always pulls on me. I'll tell anyone I like the cooler air and the smell of damp leaves, but the truth is, I miss the way this town used to tell stories out loud. Maple Hollow had a talent for it. When I was a kid, the Pritchard Lantern Walk wound through the historic district with a line of families and a box of battery candles, our breath smoking in the air while retired teachers told us about harmless ghosts with good manners. It was all gentle and silly, and even when someone tried to be scary it came out friendly. You could walk home afterward under the old elms and not look behind you once. What brought me to the square that night wasn't the lantern walk. That had faded away with the candy store and the two-screen movie theater. It was a new flyer taped to the bakery window, printed on thick paper and soaked but not ruined by the rain. A guided tour, one night only, through the Calder house. The picture was small, just the outline of a two-story with a steep roof and a crooked porch, the windows black. No orange fonts or cartoon ghosts. No promises of jump scares. Just a time, an address out on Crooked Elm Road, and a name for the guide, Miles Rook. The bakery lights were warm and emptying when I ducked inside to get out of the weather. Mrs. Bell, gray hair, quick smile, looked up from wiping her counter and laughed when she saw me reading the flyer from the dry side. "You'll catch your death," she said, the sort of thing people say when the rain makes them kind. "You here for the tour?" "I'm curious," I said, and she shrugged. "We sell the coffee for them," she said. "Big metal urns. Hot enough to peel paint. Folks stand around the porch cups in hand and try to look braver than they are. It's good business for one night. You going to go?" "I think so." She nodded like she was approving something besides the tour. "He's quiet," she said. "The guide doesn't shout. We don't need shouting." She poured me a small coffee without asking, slid it across the counter with a napkin for my hands, and didn't charge me. I stood under the awning and finished it in slow sips, watching the rain bead and run off the flyer's plastic sleeve. I drove out past the school and the water tower, past the cemetery wall with the carved lambs and clipped grass, and took the right at the gas station where the lights always buzzed more than they should. Crooked Elm was a narrow road with a shallow ditch on either side, a tunnel of trees. My wipers beat a steady metronome, and the radio stayed off. I wanted the sound of the rain and my own caution. You could drive past the Calder place a dozen times in daylight and not see it. The porch slouches behind a hedge, and the hedge leans behind a fence, and the fence sits back from the road as if that would help. The house looks older than it is, because weather and neglect put years on a place faster than birthdays do. People had lived there before it was unlived. They talked there, raised children there, shelled beans on that porch with their feet up and the dog under the chair. Then Graham Calder disappeared, and the story he took with him was so loud the house went quiet. You can argue about the details of what he did or didn't do, you can count names and dates, but what stuck was the feeling. Maple Hollow doesn't talk much about the Calder case. It lowered its voice and kept walking. A string of porch bulbs cast a soft honeyed light across the steps and onto the wet boards. Someone had thought about mood and chosen warmer bulbs instead of the harsh white kind. The rain made the light look thicker. A half-dozen people stood together under the overhang. 2 college kids in scarves, a man with a cane and the patient posture that comes with it, a mother and her teenage daughter, a woman about my age with a windbreaker folded over her arm, and me. We all had that look people wear before something starts, attention, curiosity, and a little relief when they realize anyone else is there at all. A thermos sat on a card table with paper cups and a sign that said coffee in tidy block letters. There was a small cash box on the corner of the table and a jar marked donation. When the front door opened, we didn't crowd the way people do at concerts. We let the rain talk for a second and then looked up together. The guide wasn't a man in a cape or someone who wanted applause. He was in a gray sweater, dark jeans, and clean work boots. He carried a small flashlight in the lazy loop of his hand and kept it pointed down. His face was ordinary in a way that made it pleasant to look at. He nodded to us and we nodded back, something like neighbors passing on a sidewalk. "Good evening," he said. "Thanks for coming out in this." His voice wasn't theatrical. Like Mrs. Bell said, he didn't shout. "I'm Miles. I'll say 2 things up front. First, this is a walk and a listen, not a haunted house with people jumping out at you. Second, we stay together. If you need to step out, let me know and I'll step with you. It's a small place. There's no reason for anyone to be lost." We paid $5 each. It felt honest to hand it to him and watch him place it in the box. He didn't lock the box or make a point about it. He put the money in and closed the lid and looked at each of us one by one. He wasn't memorizing names. He was making eye contact to remind us he was a person and we were people too. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider with a small gesture as if inviting us into the foyer of a church. The house air was cool and dry and carried the faint smell of old wood and dust that gets more polite when it's damp outside. The floors were bare and had been swept. I could see the work in the corners where the broom had been careful. The walls were mostly empty. No cobwebs, no fake blood, no staged junk. Whatever had been left here after the investigation was long gone. Empty rooms have manners when they're kept clean. You could stand in the front hall and hear the rain on the porch, and your own breath inside your mask and not feel like the house wanted anything from you yet. Miles let the door ease close behind us. The bulb above the stairs was low and soft, a single glass globe that made everything look sepia and kind. He stood with his back to the newel post and tucked the flashlight in his pocket like a habit. 3 rooms downstairs, he said, and 2 up. The cellar's off the kitchen. It's damp and the stairs are shallow, so we'll decide together if we want to go down. I don't use recordings or props. I'll show you a few things that are still here and tell you what I know. You'll hear the rain. That's the whole show. The daughter squeezed her mother's hand once, quick and embarrassed by her own reflex as soon as she felt it. The man with the cane adjusted his grip, and I could tell by his face he was deciding whether to test the cellar steps later. The college kids whispered something to each other, and then were quiet. We followed Miles into the front parlor. The room was square and higher ceilinged than modern rooms like to be. Someone had pulled the curtains back to let the porch light in. There was a fireplace with a painted wood mantel, scratch marks along the edge where somebody's keys had lived their whole life. The only furniture was a straight-backed chair against the far wall, and a narrow table beneath the front window. On the table was a glass ashtray with a long-ago cigarette burn that had bubbled the edge. The burn looked like a small black eye. Miles didn't point at the fireplace. He set his palm on the mantel as if greeting the room the same way he had greeted us. Nobody's comfortable with this house for the same reason nobody's comfortable with a closed book they read when they were too young, he said. Everybody's got a version. This is mine, and it's not a mystery show. It won't end with an answer. The rain helps. He looked at the table. Graham Calder's mother kept a fern here, he said. There's a ring in the wood. If you look sideways in the right light, you can see it. The day the police took the boxes out, somebody set an ashtray there and left a cigarette burning. The ash fell on the edge and made that blister. There's a report that lists the ashtray as evidence. They logged it and bagged it and gave it a number and returned it to the property when the case went cold. I didn't know the state did that with small things, but they do. He didn't tell us what happened in this room or what didn't. He didn't say the words murder or victim. He talked about the evidence return slip, the bubble in the glass, the way a fern leaves a pattern of water and wood. The college girl stepped closer to the table to see the ring in the light. She smiled when she found it, and then looked chagrined that she was smiling. The mother traced the air, not touching the mantel, as if her fingertips could hover over the ridges and read the scratches like braille. We went to the dining room next, and the rain came in through the 2 tall windows with the same steady sound. There were no chairs there, only the mark of their absence, little round scars on the floor where the legs had rested for decades. The chandelier was gone, too, but the ceiling remembered it with a circle of cleaner white where it had once shielded the plaster from smoke and time. Miles stood by the doorway and let the quiet fill in before he talked. He had a way of not rushing that made the room feel safer than it had a minute ago. My mother took us past this house on the way to the grocery when I was small, he said. She would slow down here even when nobody was behind us, and we'd look through these 2 windows because there were always lights on at night. Even after. The city had them on a timer to keep people from breaking in. It made the place look lived in the way a boarded-up place can look lived in if you want it to. We'd drive by slow and my sister would say, "Is that the dining room?" And my mother would brave a look to the porch and say, "I think so," and then speed up for the four-way because she didn't want to sit and answer follow-up questions. He stepped in, put his fingers on the casing where the paint had peeled and the wood showed through like a thin wrist. They took plaster moldings off in here, he said. They made casts of the feet of the table and the base of a sideboard and tried to match them to gouges in the floor where the wood is scuffed and worn. It's the sort of thing TV shows make into fingerprints and courtroom fireworks. Here, it just means the furniture was heavy and people pulled it back and forth for years. There's a newspaper photo of an officer kneeling with a measuring tape, looking solemn. He looks like a man who needed to look solemn for someone's sake. We stood for another moment and listened to the rain and the little tick of water on metal outside where the downspout did its work. The man with the cane said quietly, "I ate Sunday lunch in a room like this when I was 12. That was all. He didn't tell us where or with whom. He gave the room a memory he could have kept, and then we moved on. The kitchen was clean in the way a bare room is clean. The sink was a deep porcelain tub with a spiderweb crack in the glaze and a new faucet someone had put in badly. The ceiling was low enough that even I could touch it without stretching, and there was a calendar nail near the doorframe where a nail had no business being except that it had always been there. On the far wall was a door that went down. It was open to the first step, and the darkness beyond it looked like water. The wood of the stairs shone with the heel marks of years. "Cellar," Miles said, and there was a small shifting among us, not fear exactly but the agreement a group makes to postpone a decision. He didn't push. He walked to the back porch door and pulled it open to show the little screen stoop, the wet steps beyond, the gray yard with the hedge and the fence and the road. The rain sounded different outside, a little brighter, a little less private. "This is where they carried the boxes," he said. "They lined them up along the porch rail, and the men in blue shirts carried them to the truck, one after another, like a chore. The boxes had numbers and letters in pencil. The photos show that much and not more. There are people who will tell you what was in them, and where each box ended up. I don't know. I wasn't here. I only know the porch sagged after, and they braced it." He closed the door and turned to the cellar again. "The steps are narrow," he said. "There's a light switch, but it's old, so I'll go first. The handrail is wobbly. If anyone would rather wait at the table, you'll still be in earshot. This will take 3 minutes. We go down, we turn around, we come back." The mother and daughter looked at each other and decided together to stay in the kitchen. The college kids started down behind Miles with their hands on the wall, and a quiet, nervous laugh they didn't finish. The man with the cane tested the first step with the rubber tip, then his weight, and then he nodded to himself and followed with the slow, sure rhythm people learn when they've had to. The woman in the windbreaker, and I went last. The light in the cellar was a string of 2 bulbs, each with its own pull chain, and the shine they made was the color of old paper. It smelled like the bottom of the linen closet at my grandmother's house, clean and cool, a little bit like iron and rainwater. The floor was concrete poured rough a long time ago. Shelves made from 2x4s ran along one wall, and there was a laundry sink so heavy 2 men would have grunted getting it down there. One wall had chalk lines on it at heights that could have been children's. They weren't letters. They were small horizontal dashes, the kind you make without realizing you're making a mark that will outlast your reason for making it. Miles didn't narrate much. He let us stand in it, and hear the house above us and the rain beyond that. He put his hand on the laundry sink's lip and felt the cold with his palm, like someone remembering something. Then he said, "There's a theory that we make places bad by revisiting them badly. I'm not here to argue with theories. I sweep down here with a real broom, and I don't speak if I don't have to. The chalk marks were here before the tape and the photos and the boxes. That's enough of a story to leave alone." We climbed back up with the same care with which we'd gone down. The mother and daughter were relieved to see us reappear. The college boy said, "Stairs like a ship," to his companion, and she nodded like she'd been thinking the same phrase and was grateful to have it said out loud. We stood in the kitchen, and the rain gave us an easy silence to gather in. Upstairs the house found its smallest voice. The hall ran front to back with 2 rooms on the left and a bathroom at the far end, door open to show a clawfoot tub and a window that looked like a square of a gray painting. The first bedroom had no bed, just the shape of one on the floor where a simple frame had once rubbed a ghost into the boards. A nail above the window held nothing. If there had been curtains, they were in a box somewhere. The only color was a water stain in the corner that looked like an atlas of a place you couldn't visit. The second bedroom had a narrow closet with a door that didn't close right, and a mirror leaned against the wall with the silvering gone in the center. The glass showed you your own shape in a foggy way that softened the edges of your face, and made you look kinder or more tired depending on how generously you held yourself in that moment. Miles waited for all of us to shuffle into the second room and find a place to stand without stepping on each other. The wood floor gave a polite creak and then settled. He took a breath and let it out the way you do when you're about to say a thing you don't want to rush. "People always ask where," he said. "They want to stand in the exact spot where something happened. They want to put their feet in the shape of it and translate it into certainty. If I could lay down tape and show you, I wouldn't. I could tell you a corner, and it might be wrong. I could tell you a direction, and you might make it into something it isn't. I think it's enough to know that bad weather gathered upstairs and downstairs and out in the yard until it felt like the sky had sunk." He didn't look at any one of us when he said it. He looked into the mirror with the gone silver and saw himself in a smudged oval like a person underwater. His sweater had collected a few rain dots where he must have brushed against the porch rail. He pressed his fingertips together lightly as if to warm them and then let his hands rest at his sides. The college girl raised her hand like a student. "Did you know him?" she asked. "Mr. Calder?" "No," he said. "I knew the house the way everyone did. Right after, it was on the news every night for a week while the men in jackets stood on the porch and read from paper. Then it was on the news once a year for a while, every October, with footage of those two windows lit and the hedge black. After a bit, it stopped being on TV and started being a way to mark time. You'd drive by and say, 'They really should fix that porch,' and someone would say, 'They really should, but who's they?' And then you'd keep driving. You get used to a story standing there, and you start to think it's furniture. Then you come inside like this, and you remember it was a house. I don't think remembering harms it. I think talking sometimes does. So I try to do more of one and less of the other." The man with the cane cleared his throat the way polite men do before they make a small confession. "My brother worked with him at the lumberyard in high school," he said. "He always said he was ordinary. Quiet and early to work and last to leave." Miles nodded. "Most people are ordinary," he said. "That's why we can stand in a room like this and feel calm. The house doesn't perform for us. It doesn't make us anything. It lets us be. If there's a reason to open the door tonight, I think that's it." We stood long enough for the rain to get interesting, little changes in rate and texture that sounded like memory correcting itself. When we stepped back into the hall, the woman in the windbreaker paused at the mirror and touched the frame with 2 fingers. She wasn't checking her hair. She was making sure the thing in the glass was attached to the wall, and not to the air. Miles led us back toward the stairs and then didn't take them. He stopped in front of a narrow door half the size of a regular one. It was flush with the wall and painted the same off-white, and the only way to see it was to notice the crack where it closed and the small black keyhole that looked like a mouth holding breath. He took a key from his pocket and turned it in the lock. The key was brass and old, the sort of key you draw if someone said draw a key. "This is the part one don't always do," he said. "When we open this, we open it slow. The steps are steeper than the cellar and narrower. We won't go up. I'll put the flashlight on the first few so you can see the angle. If anyone feels the need to stand at the bottom and see that it exists, this is the time." He raised the little light and slipped the beam through the slot of the open door. It caught dust motes in a slender triangle and showed a series of steps too shallow for comfortable feet, climbing at a pitch that would make you lean forward and grab for something that probably wasn't there. The smell was dry and attic-like, old paper and old cloth and summer heat stored and released slowly. I felt rather than heard the group's weight lean forward and then check itself. The daughter whispered, "What's up there?" And Miles answered honestly, "A small space and older wood," he said. "A little window with a view across the hedge to the road and the suggestion of where the river runs by the cotton mill if the trees are bare. There's a rope tied to a beam that someone left long enough ago that the knot is part of the beam now. There's a cardboard box with marbles in it. The marbles are cloudy and a few are chipped, and when the wind moves the house they click together in a sound you will mistake for rain if you've never heard marbles in a box. That's all." The college boy made a soft approving noise at that, a half-laugh given to the idea of marbles paying rent in an attic. The man with the cane set the rubber tip on the first step and then took it away. The mother squeezed her daughter's hand again, and this time didn't pretend she hadn't. We were human in a line in a hallway. There was nothing heroic about it. There didn't need to be. Miles closed the attic door and turned the key and slid it back in his pocket without making a ceremony out of it. We went back down the stairs, and the house gave us the creaks you get used to when you live with old wood. In the front hall he stood by the newel post again and put his hand where he had before, as if the house and he had an agreement, and it required a touch. He looked at each of us the way he had when we arrived. "That's it," he said. "You can sit on the porch under the light for a few minutes if you want, and I'll bring a few cups out for coffee. You can say the things people say when something is finished and nobody wants to be the first to leave. If you'd like to walk through again, there's time. I'll stay. I don't lock the door until the rain stops, and on nights like this I'm happy to be the last one out." Nobody clapped because it wasn't that kind of thing. We said thank you in the small, honest voices people use when they mean it. The mother told her daughter to get a cup for both of them, and the girl went to the card table and poured carefully so the hot coffee wouldn't splash, her tongue curled in concentration. The college kids stepped out to the porch, stood shoulder to shoulder, and looked at the hedge and the road and the black beyond. The man with the cane shook Miles's hand and said, "You did right by it." And Miles said, "Thank you," in a tone that accepted the weight of the compliment without bending under it. The woman in the windbreaker stood near the window and watched water drop off the rail into the small puddle below, round perfect circles that became another puddle. I lingered in the hall. I wasn't waiting for anything as dramatic as a sign. I was listening to the house breathe. I had been away a long time, and the quiet here pressed on an old part of my chest and made it ache in a tolerable way. Miles noticed I hadn't moved and didn't hurry me. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor the way people do when they are giving you privacy without walking away. The rain fell a little harder for a moment, and then calmed itself as if remembering that it was supposed to be steady tonight. "Did you grow up here?" he asked me, and the question was so ordinary and so well-timed that I laughed, a small, self-conscious sound. "In town," I said. "On Sycamore. We could cut through the lots behind the feed store and come out by the mill bridge. I left after high school. I don't come back much." "Most people don't," he said. "There's no duty in it." "I saw your name on the flyer," I said. "Rook. I had a shop teacher with that last name." "My uncle," he said. "He taught 3 generations of kids how to square a board. I never could. He didn't hold it against me." We stood a moment longer. The house felt neither welcoming nor unfriendly. It felt like a place that had seen people make themselves comfortable and uncomfortable in equal measure, and had learned how to let both happen without breaking. I could have left then. I could have said thanks again and gone to the porch and drunk coffee under the bulbs while the cold air crept into the cuffs of my coat and made me feel awake. Instead, I said a sentence I didn't know I was going to say until I was saying it. "I wrote him letters once," I said. Miles didn't look surprised. He didn't look anything but present. "To who?" he asked. "To Graham," I said. "When I was 19. I was home from school for a weekend and I had to drive out to Crooked Elm to prove to myself the house was still just wood and glass. That was a thing I did then, driving to prove things to myself. I parked across the road and sat where I could see the porch. It was summer. The windows were hot with sunset, and the timer light hadn't come on yet. I had a notebook in the glove box and I wrote him a letter I never mailed. I think I wrote 3 over the next year and mailed one to a post office box somebody said belonged to an attorney who once represented a man nobody could find. It was like sailing a bottle. It made me feel like I had thrown the thing and watched it splash. I don't think anyone pulled it out of the water." "What did you say?" Miles asked, and his voice did the thing it had done all night. It made listening feel like standing in a kitchen while the rain is soft. "I asked what it felt like to be the center of a quiet," I said. What it did to his ideas about himself to have this much town pressed up against his name. I asked him if he wanted to be found in the way a person wants to be found when they drift out too far. I asked why there were chalk marks in basements, and a rope tied to a beam and a fern ring on a table, and no reasonable story that put all of them in a row. I didn't ask what he did. Maybe I thought I was being kind by not asking. Maybe I just didn't want to know what the voice in my head would sound like if it said it back to me. Miles nodded like I had said something common and difficult and true. Did writing help? He asked. It made me feel like I'd stood at the edge of the water and put my hand out, I said. It didn't make the horizon closer. It didn't make the tide change. It's just something I did with my hand. He smiled, small and not unkind. A lot of us stood here and held out a hand to something we couldn't name, he said. There's no sin in it. The college boy laughed on the porch at something the girl said, a bright, quick sound like a coin hitting a table. The mother told her daughter not to drink the coffee so fast. The man with the cane said good night, and meant it. The woman in the windbreaker was looking at the flyer on the card table, folding and unfolding the corner as if to test the paper's patience. The house breathed. I'll lock the attic in a moment, Miles said. Then I'll sit on the porch until the rain changes its mind. If you want another walk through, you can take it. I would, I said, and he moved his hand in a quiet go-ahead. I walked the rooms in the other direction, kitchen to dining room to parlor, and tried to see them as rooms without stories. It's hard to do when you know a story, even a tattered one. Your eyes want to hang curtains where the windows are bare. They want to set placemats where the table isn't. In the parlor I put my palm on the mantel where Miles had, and the wood was cool and dry, and so lightly dusty my skin made a small clean shape in the powder that went away when I breathed on it. I stood where a couch might have been and imagined a television talking gentle nonsense from the corner. I pictured a man standing in the doorway with his boots unlaced, listening to a game on a radio and waiting for the kettle to sigh. Ordinary. That word fit inside this room. It fit better than any other. In the front hall I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at the bulb. Bugs had found their way in and left their small brown signatures on the glass. The keyhole of the attic door looked like a tiny mouth practicing how to speak. The floorboards told me every step anyone had taken for a long time. Houses keep a record in places a judge can't read. If there's a library of such records, it's in the way boards remember weight and give it back as sound. I went out to the porch and the air tasted like wet leaves and pavement. The college kids were talking about the chalk marks and whether they meant anything. The mother and daughter had their paper cups cupped in both hands like birds. The man with the cane had gone. The woman in the windbreaker stood at the rail and watched her own shoes. Miles sat on the top step with his forearms on his knees like a man who knew how to sit still without feeling like he had to stand again in a minute. The bulbs above us hummed in that old filament way and made the rain look like strings. Thank you, I said, and he nodded. I'll take the long way back to town, I added, and he said, that's a good way to drive on a night like this. I walked down the steps and put my hand on the rail out of habit even though it wasn't slippery. I crossed the yard and then the ditch, and then stood a moment on the other side of the road under the trees, looking back. The house didn't look menacing. It looked like a man sitting with his forearms on his knees. It looked like a thing that would keep your secrets because it had to, not because it wanted to. On the drive back, I passed the mill and the river and the gas station with the buzzing lights and the cemetery wall with the carved lambs. The rain eased and then returned, and the wipers worked and rested. I turned left onto Sycamore without thinking and drove past the house where I had learned to ride a bike by aiming for the hedge. The porch light was on there too, a different bulb but the same small promise. I parked outside the motel and sat for a minute because I liked the sound the rain made on the roof and the way the parking lot shone like black glass. I slept and dreamed ordinary dreams with strangers in them who gave good advice and then were gone. In the morning, the sky was lighter and the town looked like a place that had been washed and set on a towel to dry. I signed the papers at the lawyer's office and initialed the places that wanted my initials and then stood in front of the bakery again out of nothing more complicated than wanting to smell bread. Mrs. Bell waved me in and poured coffee and asked me if I went, and I said I did, and she said, "Was it nice?" And I said, "It was quiet." And she said, "That's nice." I hadn't planned to drive back out to the Calder house. People who understand their own patterns would have guessed I would. The air had that bright blue newness it sometimes gets after rain when the leaves shine as if they're going to stay that shade forever. I took the long way again, past the mill where steam curled, past the cotton gin where a man in a hat watched a truck back up in a slow dance. Crooked Elm looked benign, all dapple and mice of light and shadow. I pulled to the side of the road by the hedge and shut off the engine and listened. No rain. No voices. Just a woodpecker somewhere sounding like a dull carpenter, and a dog farther than that with a half-hearted bark. A piece of paper was stuck under the windshield wiper blade. I don't know how long it had lived there. The ink was fine and not run. It was folded once. I slid it out and stood by the car with my hand on the roof without thinking, because people stand like that when they read things in driveways, in parking lots, at mailboxes. The paper had 3 lines on it, written in tidy block letters that looked like someone had learned to print in a school where penmanship mattered. Thank you for writing what you wrote when you did. It is sometimes a kindness not to ask a question out loud. If you ever feel the room tilt, sit down and turn the lights lower. No name. No signature. No request for money or attention. The letters were even. The paper smelled like a house with windows that opened and a drawer with old receipts in it. I folded it back on itself and slid it into the glove box, and thought about the idiot chance that it had found its way under this one windshield wiper. Then I thought about how many evenings had passed in this town with people standing at kitchen sinks, looking at the rain, telling the same small truth to themselves about what they could ask and what they shouldn't. It made the note feel less like a message and more like a sentence the town had been practicing and had finally gotten right enough to hand to someone. On my way out of Maple Hollow, I stopped at the hardware store to buy a couple of things I didn't need. A tape measure in a size I already owned. A packet of sandpaper. Men buy things like that when they are in a place they loved once. The man behind the counter was new to me and young and spoke with the easy kindness of someone who had decided to be the sort of person who helps even when help isn't needed. As he handed me my bag he said, "You headed out?" And I said, "For a while." And he said, "It'll still be here." And I said, "I know. There are towns where the bad story eats the rest. People leave and tell it over and over elsewhere until their mouths are tired and the story has changed shape so many times it isn't food anymore. There are towns where the story sits and people learn to walk around it without spilling their coffee. Maple Hollow is the second kind. The house stands. The hedge grows. Someone sweeps the cellar and replaces a light bulb upstairs when it goes. On one October night a group of people listens to the rain, and a quiet man talks about rings left by ferns and marbles clicking in a box. A note is left under a windshield wiper and says not much and enough. I don't know if Graham Calder is out there somewhere with a new name and a careful life, or if he isn't anywhere we could mail anything. I don't know if the chalk marks in the cellar were made by a child measuring a sister's height, or by an officer measuring shadows. I don't know if the rope in the attic tied to the beam held anything heavier than a bundle of old clothes that needed to be hoisted and tied out of the way before a summer storm knocked the window open. I know I stood in that hall and felt the house offer me nothing but itself. I know I felt my eyes flick once at a sound I only half heard and then settle, and I sat down on the steps because the note told me to and because there was no honor I'd be violating to do so. On the interstate, miles out, a thin sheet of rain crossed the road and was gone like a thought. I turned the radio on and then off because the song was too busy for what I wanted the day to be. At the state line, the clouds broke for a while and the sun came through in a way that made the left-hand side of the road look like it was made of coins. I didn't plan what I would tell anyone about the tour because I don't have anyone to tell it to the way you tell a thing to a person who was there. I planned to make dinner and turn the lights lower and sit with the window cracked to let the evening in and listen to whatever sound the weather brought me. If the room tilted, I would sit down. If my eyes moved left-right for a second like a nervous bird, I would let them and then let them stop. If anyone asked me later whether the Calder house was frightening, I would say no. I would say it was a place where the rain sounded like breathing. I would say the guide was kind to the rooms. Before the mile marker started to count me out of the county, I called the number on an old contact card I hadn't used in years. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that was a recording of a woman's voice saying a number and a beep. I said, "It's me. I walked through the house last night. It was quiet. If you're keeping a list of things that ended without a fight, you can put this on it." And then I hung up and felt foolish, and then didn't. By full dark I was 100 miles away, and the sky had gone clear in a way that makes the stars look like writing you can almost read. I carried my bag inside, put the tape measure in a drawer with other tape measures, and left the sandpaper on the counter because it looked right there. I turned the lamp in the living room halfway down, and stood a minute in that light remembering the soft bulbs on the porch, and the way the rain looked like strings. I poured a glass of water and didn't add ice. I sat and listened to the small noises a house makes when it knows you're home. Sometime after midnight I woke because I thought I'd heard a sound like marbles in a box, a gentle clicking you could mistake for rain if you didn't know what marbles sound like. It was the ice maker in the fridge settling. I sat on the edge of the bed, let my feet find the rug, and smiled because of course it was. I said out loud, because it felt right to say something, "Keep your distance and say your prayers." And then I laughed at myself for borrowing a sentence from someone else's story, and lay back down, and listened to the night turn into the kind of quiet you can sleep inside. I don't know if that note will mean anything a month from now, or whether I'll throw it away when I clean the glove box in a year. I don't know if Miles will still unlock the door when October comes around again. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Maybe someone else will stand at the newel post, and put their hand there lightly and speak in a voice that keeps the house from having to defend itself. Maybe the porch light will stay on all winter so the mail carrier doesn't have to step into shadow to bring a letter nobody expects. Maybe there isn't another letter. Maybe the last one already made it to where it was going. When I turn things over in my head, I keep coming back to the moment by the attic door. The small slot of dark, the dry smell, the uselessness of knowing exactly what was at the top of those steep steps. We didn't go up. We stood together and let the idea of up be enough. There was a rope tied to a beam, there were marbles in a box, there was a window. That's what the guide said. That's what my mind kept, not because it solves anything but because it sits in me like a level table in a room with soft light. My life is quieter when I remember it that way. I can't give you a better ending than that because the town didn't. Maple Hollow has room for a porch light and a hedge and a house that still stands. It has room for the Pritchard lantern walk that doesn't exist anymore except in the way I breathe when I smell rain. It has room for names we don't say because saying them would make noise we don't need. It has room for a note tucked under a wiper and a coffee poured under a bulb and a man with a cane saying, gently, "You did right by it." Most places have that much room if you give them a chance. If there's a twist in it, it's the one where you go looking for fear and find the ordinary instead, and the ordinary turns out to be the only thing big enough to hold the rest. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I spend Halloween the same way every year now. I sit on a bar stool with one beer, and I make it last. I watch the glass sweat on the counter, and I listen to the low talk and the clink of ice. I'm not there to get drunk. I'm there because I don't want to be at home. I promised the deputy I wouldn't tell this story. He said the town didn't need it, and I agreed at the time. I deleted the video. Still, when October rolls around, the whole night comes back to me, clear as if it happened last week, and I start thinking that maybe telling it is better than keeping it buried. I live at the end of a lane lined with the same small houses, copies of copies. Mine is like the rest, a prefab box with a short porch, a patch of grass, and a few trees that drop their leaves too early every fall. It's far enough from the main road to be cheap and quiet, but not far enough to count as out in the country. On Halloween, most kids fill their buckets long before they reach my place. I keep a couple of small bags of candy just in case a few determined kids make it all the way down, but usually the night is quiet. I used to like that. I'd put on an old horror movie, dim the living room lamp, and let the commercials break the tension when I needed it. That night I can't remember what was on. Maybe a classic. Maybe some sequel playing too loud. I'd had dinner and an after-dinner beer, and maybe one too many after that. I dozed off on the couch. I woke up a little before midnight with my hand still around the can, the beer gone warm. When I pried my fingers off, they stuck to the aluminum for a second. The TV was on some late-night nonsense by then, the kind of program that hums along in the background like a refrigerator. Maybe a car door slammed somewhere. Maybe a neighbor's trash lid banged. It doesn't take much to jar you awake when you've been sleeping with a thin blanket over your lap and the lights low. I checked the time out of habit and stood up, telling myself I should wash the dishes, toss the empties, call it a night. I'd spent a little money on security that summer, a camera on the front lawn, motion-activated lights on the porch and out back. Basic stuff. It made me feel better about the emptiness around my place when the wind blew through and made the world sound bigger than it is. Then someone knocked on the door. Loud. Hard enough to rattle the wood. The can tipped off the table, bounced on the carpet, and sprayed warm beer across my ankle. I flinched and grabbed the can and set it upright, but the knocking came again before I could curse. Fast, offbeat, a little angry. The kind of knocking that doesn't sound like a neighbor. I crept to the door and peered at the window beside it. My face looked back at me, pale against the glass. The yard behind my reflection was just black. No porch light. No soft glow on the steps. I frowned. The lights should have fired the second anyone set foot on that first board. Maybe it was a branch. Maybe the wind. I told myself that. I told myself out loud. It's nothing. And hearing my own voice helped a little, like a hand on your shoulder. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing but the dark yard and the orange cones from the streetlights up the lane. Then the knocking came a third time, and it pulled something tight in my chest. Our town isn't big on crime. People leave their lawn chairs out. Bikes sit in driveways without chains on them. You hear about bad things in far-off places, and you think they can't possibly find you here. Mostly they don't. I set my hand on the doorknob, expecting it to feel cold, and opened the door. The porch lights snapped on. The sudden brightness made my eyes water, and I had to blink hard to clear the white spots. When I could see again, 2 small figures were standing on my porch. They were the size of 9 or 10-year-olds. Each wore a simple white sheet with 2 round eye holes. Old-fashioned costumes. Each held a little handled basket at waist height. The toes of shiny dress shoes poked out from under the sheets. Trick or treat. I expected the words. Everyone says them this time of year. What I didn't expect was the sound of them. The voices didn't come from the kids like normal speech, not from their bodies, not from the porch. They sounded far away and yet right in front of me, like a pair of voices coming through a tunnel and blending into each other at the edges. There was a strange harmony to it, a shimmer, as if the 2 voices were the same words spoken twice and dragged across itself. Trick or treat, they said again, exactly the same way. Not louder or softer. Not playful. Like they were reading off a card they couldn't set down. Treat, I said because I didn't want to see what trick meant. Hold on. I turned to grab the candy. The bag was on the counter where I'd left my keys. As I picked it up, I had a sudden, stupid hope that when I got back to the door they would be gone, like a dream that pops when you sit up too fast. I walked back, and they were still there. They hadn't moved at all. They raised their baskets in unison. They were already heavy with candy, mini bars and lollipops and wrapped chocolates. They'd made a long loop, I guessed, and I was at the tail end of it. A bit late for you too, isn't it? I said, trying on a normal tone and hearing it not quite fit. Where are your parents? They didn't answer. They shook their baskets, and the sound of wrappers slid and whispered together. I leaned to drop the candy in and saw, instead of a small pale hand under the basket handle, a smooth plastic hand. The color was wrong, flat and too even. The texture was wrong. The fingers were molded into a permanent curl. It was a mannequin hand, The little trick worked on me harder than it should have. I felt my scalp prickle, then I told myself, of course. Someone's kid got clever. Someone's dad works retail. Someone thought it'd be funny to make a ghost child with a fake hand. The voices could be a toy stuffed under the sheet, a speaker hidden in the basket. You can do a lot with a cheap phone and a free app. I let that explanation smooth out my nerves like a hot iron. I dropped candy into each basket. The pieces thumped on top and slid down. Stay safe, I said. I wanted them off my porch and off my property. I shut the door gently but firmly. The light on the porch clicked off at once. In the quiet that followed, I heard their footsteps on the boards, 2 sets, small and careful, going away. The porch light still bothered me. It had turned on for me the second I opened the door. It had stayed on while I stood there. It had gone dark as soon as I closed the door. It hadn't triggered when they came up, and it hadn't triggered as they left. The lights are passive infrared. They don't care about motion alone. They care about warmth. They see changes in heat. They saw me. They never saw the kids. The thoughts slid into me like a cold blade. Whatever stood on my porch had not been warm. I stood with my fingers on the curtain and felt them shake. The fabric twitched under my grip and then swayed like something alive. I reminded myself to breathe, and I pulled the edge of the curtain back a half-inch and peered out. They were still there. 20 yards off, at the edge of my yard where the grass meets the sidewalk, 2 small white shapes under the streetlights. They were facing the street. They were perfectly still. The street was empty. It was so late that the night had started to fold into morning. As I stared, both heads turned. Not slowly. Not jerkily. Just together, in one smooth motion. The black eye holes faced my window. They couldn't have seen me move the curtain. They couldn't have known I was looking. And yet they knew. The window felt like skin. I bit the back of my hand to keep from making a sound. I let the curtain fall. I backed away on unsteady feet. My heel hit the fallen can, and it rolled, painting a wet stain across the carpet. Every bit of calm reason I had put on like a jacket fell off me. Run, something in me said. Run, get help, don't be trapped. But another part of me answered with something older. Don't go outside. Don't turn your back on the door. Don't invite them in by calling to someone who can't see them. I shut the kitchen door, even though it didn't latch properly, and dragged my chair around to face the front of the house. I sat there with my hands on my knees and told myself I would wait until dawn. I told myself I'd just sit and watch and wait for the light. I watched the door and the window and the dark spaces between. At some point my eyes closed. Fear can carry you for only so long. The house was quiet except for the TV still mumbling somewhere, and the silence wove around me and pulled me under. A knock woke me again. This time it was firm, measured, and human. I sat up too fast and nearly sent the chair out from under me. I padded to the door, my throat dry, my tongue thick. I put my eye to the peephole and saw the round, familiar face of one of our deputies. We went to school together. He's the kind of man who wears the uniform like it belongs to him, steady, not too proud. He looked tired and serious. "Morning," he said when I opened the door. He gave the living room a quick scan over my shoulder. "Some night?" "Not a good one," I said. He sniffed at the air. The stale, sweet beer smell must have rolled out to meet him. He lifted his chin toward the yard. "You mind telling me why you stole a couple of mannequins from the store and dressed them up and set them on your lawn?" I leaned past him and looked. 2 white shapes stood on my grass, right where I had seen them last. For a second I couldn't breathe. I stepped around the deputy and out onto the wet lawn in my bare feet. The cold sank in fast. The 2 figures were standing close together. The sheets touched and dimpled between them. I realized they were holding hands under there. I reached out and put my palm on the top of the nearer head. Hard. The curve under the sheet was smooth and unyielding. In one motion I hooked my fingers and stripped the sheet away. A child's mannequin stared up at me with green plastic eyes. The paint was too bright and too flat. The eyelashes were molded on. The hair was part of the skull. The face had the blank, patient look of store windows. I stumbled back and landed on the grass, hands up, fingers curled like I could keep them off me with air. The deputy was there in an instant, catching me under the elbow and lifting me like I didn't weigh much. He guided me back inside without asking. He sat me in my office chair in front of my computer. He took the couch. He looked around at the tipped can and the ring on the table and the TV still going. He wasn't judging. He was taking inventory. "Okay," he said. "Here's what I've got. First call this morning was a break-in at the store. Halloween stuff missing. 2 mannequins, a couple of sheets. The glass was strange." He paused, considering how much to give me. "All the broken glass was outside. Not inside. That's not how doors work when they're smashed from the outside. Damnedest thing." He rubbed his jaw. "Then I'm told you've got a camera on your yard." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice yet. "Let's take 10 minutes," he said. "We roll it back. We see who set them there. We both go on with our day." I pulled up the footage. The system saves to a hard drive over Wi-Fi. I've always liked that I can scrub through the night from the safety of a chair. I opened the clip from around the time I woke up and tapped the reverse button, speeding it until people became quick ghosts, to borrow a word. On my screen the deputy and I moved backwards from the lawn to the door and into the house. The gray early light retreated. The yard went dark again. The 2 white shapes stood in place, unblinking, under the streetlights. I let the playback run a little longer. The figures didn't shift. They didn't tug at the sheets. They didn't scratch an itch or adjust a shoe the way real kids do. After a long minute at double speed they moved. Not in a human way. They swayed and jerked a few inches in unison, and then drifted backward toward the porch. On the screen, I reappeared at the door and handed candy into the baskets. I'd slowed the clip to normal by then. As I turned to go, the 2 figures tilted their heads together. The black ovals of the eye holes pointed at the camera mounted on my eave. The sheets over their chests rose and fell the slightest bit. That was the worst part, somehow. That small, patient breathing. "That's enough," the deputy said behind me, his voice tight. I turned and saw his hand resting on his pistol like it had found the grip without consulting him. His face was the color of paper. It scared me more than the screen did. I closed the window and stared at my desktop. We both sat there listening to the house breathe. I keep good whiskey for times when words don't work. I set 2 tumblers down and poured. The sound of the liquor glugging out was too cheerful for the room. "A man could lose his job drinking on duty," he said, and tossed back half the glass without blinking. We didn't speak for a minute. Then he said, "My Nan wasn't from around here. Old country. She hated Halloween. Not the candy. Not the kids. The night. She used to say there are things that only have the right to walk once a year. She said the costumes weren't for the kids. They were for the rest of us, to make us see only what we could handle. She said on that night good folks put water by the door, crossed themselves, and stayed inside." He set the glass down carefully on a coaster like he always had one there. "Whatever that is on your video, it's not a story this town needs. Not right now. You understand? High school kids," I said. The lie formed itself, easy and ready, like something we practiced. "Dumb prank. Clever kids. That's all. And your camera? Glitchy. I've been meaning to replace it." He stood, and we shook hands. He held on a second longer than usual. "Delete it," he said. "And don't talk about it." "I will," I said. And I did. I dragged the file to the trash and emptied it. For a while, I kept the story to myself. I kept it like a hot coal cupped in my hands.